There is a set of canopic jars in the Cairo Egyptian Museum whose story is more complicated than anything the jars themselves can tell you. Canopic jars are among the most intimate objects the Egyptian funerary tradition produced. They held the preserved organs of the dead, the liver, the lungs, the stomach, the intestines, removed from the body during the mummification process and stored separately in 4 sealed containers that were placed in the burial alongside the coffin. The jars were made for a specific person. They bore a specific person's name. They carried a specific person's face, carved into the lids, as the permanent identifying mark of the body they had been separated from. The canopic jars in the Cairo Museum were found in the most mysterious tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The small, enigmatic and deeply disturbed tomb designated KV55, the so-called Amarna cache, whose specific contents and their specific interpretation have been among the most argued about questions in the entire history of New Kingdom archaeology. The jars bore a woman's face. The face was carved in the distinctive style of the Amarna period, the specific artistic tradition of Akhenaten's revolutionary court, with its naturalistic treatment and its individualized characterization. The jars originally bore a woman's name, inscribed in the specific hieroglyphic conventions of the Amarna titulary, but someone had erased the name. The specific erasure, the deliberate removal of the name from the jars, leaving the face intact but rendering the identity of the person the jars had been made for officially invisible, is one of the most haunting single pieces of evidence from the Amarna period. The jars were made for someone important enough to warrant the specific quality of their execution. They were placed in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and then, at some point after their creation, the specific decision was made to remove the name of the person they belonged to. The woman was Kiya. She was a secondary wife of the pharaoh Akhenaten, not the great royal wife Nefertiti, whose story was told in the preceding episode of this series, but the other woman at the Amarna court, the woman who held the distinctive title, greatly beloved wife of the king. The woman whose name was systematically erased from monuments and objects across the Amarna site, replaced by the names of Akhenaten's daughters. The woman who may have been the mother of the most famous pharaoh in the history of the ancient world, Tutankhamun, and the woman whose specific identity, specific origins, and specific fate are among the most uncertain things about the most uncertain period in the New Kingdom's history. By the end of tonight, you are going to understand not just who Kiya was, to the extent that the extraordinary thinness and complexity of the evidence allows, but why her story, in its specific combination of intimacy and erasure, of institutional presence and intentional removal, is one of the most compelling and most humanly affecting stories from the entire Amarna period. She was important enough to be named. She was important enough to be erased. And the specific gap between the naming and the erasing, the gap that the modern scholarship has been working to understand for more than half a century, is the heart of one of the most affecting mysteries in the history of the ancient world. Before we get started, if you find these stories as fascinating as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. The gap between the naming and the erasing is the specific puzzle that this account examines. The evidence is thin, thinner than the evidence for Ti, thinner than the evidence for Nefertiti, thin enough that the most basic biographical facts about Kiya remain contested in the scholarly literature. Her name itself is unusual, not a standard Egyptian name, which has led some scholars to propose that she was a foreign princess, possibly the Mitanni princess Tadukeeper, whose arrival at the Egyptian court is documented in the Amarna letters. Her face survives in the distinctive Amarna portrait tradition, recognizable by the specific Nubian-style wig she wore, which distinguishes her representations from Nefertiti's characteristic flat-topped blue crown. Her title, greatly beloved wife of the king, was not the standard secondary wife title of the Egyptian queenly tradition, suggesting a specific institutional position that the tradition had not previously formalized, and then she was erased. Her name was chiseled off the monuments at Amarna. Her image was altered. The inscriptions that named her were reworked to name Meritaten, Akhenaten, and Nefertiti's eldest daughter, as if the daughter had simply replaced the secondary wife in the specific institutional positions that the monuments recorded. The erasure was deliberate, the erasure was systematic, and the erasure was incomplete. Enough survived that the modern archaeological tradition could identify her, reconstruct the approximate outlines of her institutional position, and begin to ask the specific questions that this account now addresses. Who was Kiya? Why was she erased? And was she the mother of Tutankhamun? These are the questions. The answers, partial, honest, and necessarily qualified, follow in the sections below. Her name was Kiya, and her story begins now. Her story begins in the sections that follow, with the evidence, with the mystery. The account of the two preceding episodes in this series established the specific context of the Amarna period in considerable detail. Tai, the great royal wife of Amenhotep III, the political intelligence behind the New Kingdom's most accomplished reign, established the institutional world of the late 18th dynasty at its zenith. Nefertiti, the great royal wife of Akhenaten, the theological partner of the Amarna revolution, the most famous face from the ancient world, established the specific character of the revolutionary transformation that Akhenaten imposed on the Egyptian tradition and the central role that his principal queen played within it. Kiya's story exists within the specific world that those two accounts established. She was not the great royal wife. She was the secondary wife, the other woman in Akhenaten's royal household, present during the revolutionary reign, holding a specific institutional position that was distinct from Nefertiti's in ways that the evidence allows us to partially but not fully reconstruct. Understanding Kiya requires understanding the specific institutional context of the secondary wife's position in the New Kingdom royal household, the specific character of the evidence that survives for her existence, and the specific scholarly tradition that has been working with that evidence since the Amarna period became the subject of systematic study. The secondary wife's position in the New Kingdom royal household was a genuine institutional role, not simply a matter of personal domestic arrangements, but a specific position within the formal structure of the pharaoh's household, with specific titles, specific representations, and specific funerary provisions that were part of the institutional record of the reign. The New Kingdom pharaohs typically had multiple wives. The great royal wife, who held the primary institutional and ritual position alongside the pharaoh, and one or more secondary wives, who held subordinate but still officially recognized positions in the royal household. The specific titles associated with the secondary wife's position varied across the New Kingdom, but the typical formulation identified the woman as a royal wife, without the great modifier that distinguished the principal queen. Kiya's title was different, greatly beloved wife of the king, a formulation that does not appear in the standard repertoire of New Kingdom queenly titles, and that has been the subject of considerable scholarly discussion about its specific institutional significance. The title, Greatly Beloved Wife, in specific Egyptian formulation preserved in the surviving inscriptions, suggests a position that was neither the standard Great Royal Wife title nor the standard secondary wife title. It was something specifically intermediate, more elevated than the conventional secondary wife, but specifically not the great royal wife. The specific institutional logic of this intermediate position has been interpreted in different ways by different scholars. The Egyptologist Cyril Aldred, who was among the first scholars to systematically identify and analyze the evidence for Kiya in his comprehensive study of the Akhenaten period, interpreted the specific title as evidence that Kiya held a position of genuine importance at the Amarna court, important enough to warrant a specific, non-standard title that distinguished her from the ordinary secondary wives, but that also specifically did not place her in competition with Nefertiti's institutional authority as great royal wife. The specific evidence for Kiya's existence and her institutional position is distributed across several categories that the following sections examine in detail. The first category is the inscriptional evidence from the Amarna site itself, the specific inscriptions on monuments, architectural elements, and objects that name Kiya in her distinctive title. The second category is the specific evidence from KV 55, the canopic jars, the altered coffin, and the other objects from the enigmatic tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The third category is the artistic evidence, the specific representations of Kiya in the Amarna artistic tradition, distinguishable from representations of Nefertiti by the distinctive Nubian-style wig she wore. The fourth category is the specific evidence from the erasures, the monuments and objects from which her name was deliberately removed and replaced. Each of these categories is examined in the exploration chapters that constitute the heart of this account. Together, they build the most complete available picture of a woman whose institutional significance was genuine, but whose specific identity and specific fate remain among the most uncertain dimensions of the Amarna period. The specific uncertainty about Kiya is different in character from the uncertainties about the other figures this series has examined. The uncertainty about Mernith was the uncertainty of contested evidence. The evidence existed, but its interpretation was shaped by prior assumptions. The uncertainty about Setibor was the uncertainty of scarcity. The evidence was too thin to support a rich reconstruction. The uncertainty about Nefertiti was the uncertainty of deliberate revision. The evidence was altered by a subsequent program of intentional suppression. Kiya's uncertainty is a combination of all three. Her evidence is thin, scarcity. Her evidence is contested. Different scholars read the same material differently, and her evidence has been deliberately altered, the erasures and replacements. This specific triple uncertainty makes her case the most epistemologically challenging in the series, the figure for whom the most basic questions produce the most divergent scholarly answers. The Egyptologist who has done the most to advance the understanding of Kiya in recent decades is Mark Gabold, whose detailed analysis of the Amarna royal succession has included a specific treatment of Kiya's institutional position and her relationship to the broader succession question that includes the question of Tutankhamun's parentage. Gabolder's work has been complemented by the contributions of Nicholas Reeves, Aidan Dodsons, and other Amarna period specialists whose analysis of specific categories of evidence has added specific dimensions to the understanding of Kiya's place at the Amarna court. The specific scale comparison that places Kiya's story in its proper context is the comparison with the other women of the Amarna court. Nefertiti, the great royal wife, is attested in thousands of representations, dozens of inscriptions, and the most famous portrait in the history of ancient art. Ti, Queen Mother, is attested in the Amarna letters, in colossal statues, in a dedicated structure at the Amarna site. Kiya is attested in a handful of inscriptions, a distinctive wig in the artistic tradition, a set of canopic jars whose name was erased, and a sunshade temple, whose inscriptions were reworked to name someone else. The numbers are striking. The gap between the richness of the evidence for Nefertiti and the thinness of the evidence for Kiya is itself evidence for the specific institutional hierarchy of the Amarna court, a hierarchy in which the great royal wife's institutional prominence generated a vast and varied documentary record, while the secondary wife's more modest institutional position generated a correspondingly more modest record. But the modest record is not an empty record. Kiya existed. She held a specific title. She had a specific sunshade temple. She had canopic jars made for her with her face and her name. She was depicted in the Amarna artistic tradition in a form that allowed scholars to identify her specific representations among the mass of the Amarna material, and the specific fact that her name was erased, that someone took the deliberate institutional decision to remove her name from the accessible record, is itself evidence for a specific historical event whose character and significance the scholarship has been working to understand. The erasure is the specific piece of the evidence that elevates Kiya's story from a footnote about a secondary wife to a genuine historical mystery. Names are not erased from the Egyptian institutional record without specific institutional reasons. The erasure of Kiya's name, its specific replacement with the name of Akhenaten on multiple monuments and objects, is the evidence for something specific having happened. The question of what happened is the core problem. The core problem follows in Section 3. The foundation is established. The categories of evidence are named. The specific character of the uncertainty is identified. and the specific institutional context that makes the erasure significant is described. Her name was Kiya. The core problem begins now. Before the core problem develops the mystery in its full form, the foundation requires one more essential element: the specific character of the name Kiya itself, and the scholarly discussion about what the name implies about her origins. The name Kiya is unusual in the Egyptian onomastic tradition, the tradition of personal naming that is one of the most studied dimensions of ancient Egyptian social and linguistic history. Egyptian personal names typically had specific etymological content. They expressed specific theological or devotional meanings, identified the bearer's specific relationship to a deity, or made specific statements about the circumstances of the bearer's birth. The name Nefertiti, the beautiful one has come, is a characteristic example, a theophoric name that expressed a specific theological and aesthetic meaning. The name Kiya does not have a clear Egyptian etymology. This specific fact, the absence of a straightforward Egyptian meaning, has been one of the primary pieces of evidence cited by scholars who argue that Kiya was not Egyptian by birth. The most widely discussed theory of her origin identifies her as the Mitanni princess Tadukipa, a daughter of Tushratta, the king of Mitanni, whose letters to Ti were examined in the first New Kingdom episode of this series. The Tadukipa theory rests on several convergent pieces of circumstantial evidence. First, the name. Kiya has been proposed as a possible Egyptianized abbreviation of a longer Mitanni name, with the specific vowel pattern of Kiya being derived from the latter portion of the name, Tadukipa. Second, the timing. Tadukipa was sent to the Egyptian court during the reign of Amenhotep III, arriving approximately in the last years of the reign. If she survived into Akhenaten's reign, she would have been present at the court during the period when Kiya is attested. Third, the title. The unusual formulation, greatly beloved wife of the king, is consistent with the specific institutional treatment that a foreign princess of a major Near Eastern power might receive, elevated enough to acknowledge her royal foreign origins, but specifically not the great royal wife. The Tadukipa identification is not universally accepted. Some scholars have argued that the specific linguistic analysis of the name does not support the proposed derivation. Others have noted that the specific evidence for Tadukipa's presence at the Egyptian court after Amenhotep III's death is not directly attested in any source outside the proposed Kiya identification itself, creating a potential circularity in the argument. The honest assessment is that the Tadukipa identification remains a hypothesis. It is the most widely discussed hypothesis about Kiya's origins, and it is supported by the convergent circumstantial evidence described above. But it is not established by direct evidence. There is no surviving text that explicitly identifies Kiya as Tadukipa, and the possibility that she was of Egyptian origin or of some other foreign origin cannot be excluded by the available evidence. This specific uncertainty about her origins is the first of the multiple uncertainties that define Kiya's case. The core problem section names all of them. The exploration chapters examine the specific evidence behind each, the specific institutional context of the Amarna period, the revolutionary court, the new capital city, the radical religious transformation, gave the secondary wife's position a specific character that it would not have had in a more conventional New Kingdom reign. The Amarna court was organized around the specific theological relationship between Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and the Aten, the solar disk whose exclusive worship was the foundation of the revolutionary program. This specific theological triangle left little institutional space for a secondary wife, who was not part of the primary theological relationship. And yet Kiya existed at this court, with her distinctive title, with her sunshade temple, with her specific representations in the artistic program, the specific institutional space she occupied, and the specific question of how that space was defined in relation to the dominant theological program of the Aten cult, is part of the core problem that the following section examines. The foundation is now complete. The institutional context of the secondary wife, the specific evidence categories, the unusual name, and the Tadukipa theory, the specific character of the Amarna court's theological organization, and the triple uncertainty of the evidence, all are established. The core problem follows. The mystery of Kiya, the naming, the erasing, and the question of Tutankhamun begins in section 3. Now, her name was Kiya. The core problem begins. The core problem begins in the section that follows. Before it does, the foundation requires the specific development of the artistic evidence, the specific character of Kiya's visual representation in the Amarna tradition, because this evidence is one of the most immediately accessible dimensions of the Kiya case, and because the specific distinguishing features of her representation are part of the essential context for understanding the exploration chapters. The Amarna artistic tradition was, as described in the Nefertiti episode, one of the most extraordinary and most distinctive artistic traditions in the history of Egyptian art. Its specific character, the naturalistic treatment of the human figure, the individualized characterization, the specific emphasis on the royal family in its domestic and ritual activities, was the direct product of the revolutionary theological vision that the Aten cult represented. The art was not simply decorative, it was theological, the specific means by which the relationship between the royal family and the divine Aten was expressed and communicated. Within this specific tradition, the representations of Kiya are distinguishable from the representations of Nefertiti by a specific visual marker, the wig. Nefertiti is consistently depicted wearing the distinctive flat-topped blue crown or one of a small number of other headdresses associated with her specific queenly identity. Kiya is depicted wearing a different headdress, a rounded, close-fitting wig that scholars have described as a Nubian-style wig, a form associated with specific non-Egyptian cultural traditions that entered the Egyptian artistic vocabulary during the New Kingdom period. This specific visual distinction, the Nubian wig versus the blue crown, is the primary means by which scholars identify specific representations as depicting Kiya rather than Nefertiti or another royal woman. The distinction is significant for the scholarly analysis of the Amarna material because it allows the identification of specific relief carvings, sculptors' models, and other artistic works as Kiya representations, even when the accompanying inscriptions have been erased or altered. The specific character of the Nubian wig, its association with non-Egyptian cultural traditions, its specific visual form, its specific deployment in the Amarna artistic program, has itself been the subject of scholarly analysis. Some scholars have interpreted the Nubian wig as evidence supporting the foreign origin theory. If Kiya was a foreign princess, the distinctive headdress might have been the specific visual marker that identified her foreign identity within the Egyptian representational system. Other scholars have interpreted the Nubian wig more broadly, as a specific artistic convention that did not necessarily carry specific ethnic or geographic implications. The specific artistic representations of Kiya, identifiable by the Nubian wig, show her in the specific context of the Amarna court's religious and domestic life. She appears in offering scenes, in domestic contexts, and in the specific Amarna family scenes that are one of the most characteristic features of the period's artistic program. Her specific representations are less numerous and less prominent than Nefertiti's, consistent with her secondary institutional position, but they are genuine and identifiable. The specific count of identified Kiya representations in the scholarly literature is small, in the range of perhaps a dozen specific identifications, depending on the specific criteria used and the specific degree of confidence with which individual representations are attributed. This small number is itself evidence for the specific scale of her institutional presence at the court, significant enough to warrant specific artistic representation, but substantially less prominent than the great royal wife. The foundation is now fully established in all its necessary dimensions. The institutional context of the secondary wife, the unusual name, and the Tadukipa theory, the artistic evidence and the Nubian wig, the specific categories of evidence, the specific character of the uncertainty, the scholarly tradition, all of this behind the core problem that follows, all of it necessary for the full understanding of the mystery that the core problem names and that the exploration chapters examine. The core problem. Section 3. Her name was Kiya. Beginning now. The Amarna court, the secondary wife, the distinctive title, the Nubian wig, the canopic jars, the erasure, and the question of Tutankhamun, all of this is the core problem. All of it begins in the following section, all of it building toward the full recognition that the evidence, thin, complex, deliberately altered, permits. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the erased woman, the possible mother of Tutankhamun. The core problem begins now. The core problem begins now, in the section that follows, with the full weight of the foundation behind the argument. But first, one more foundational element that the exploration chapters require, the specific description of the Maru-Aten, the sunshade temple at Amarna, that is one of the most directly attributable architectural structures associated with Kiya. The Maru-Aten was a specific type of structure in the Amarna architectural program, a sunshade temple designed for the specific purpose of the rituals of the Aten cult. The term sunshade in the Egyptian context referred to a specific architectural form, an open-air structure designed to provide a specific space for the performance of the solar rituals that were the center of the Aten cult's worship program. Sunshade temples were associated with specific royal women. They were, in a sense, the specific architectural expression of a royal woman's institutional role in the Aten cult. The Maru-Aten at Amarna was originally associated with Kiya. The specific inscriptions on the structure named her and her title, but at some point after her disappearance from the record, the inscriptions were altered. Kiya's name was removed and replaced with the name of Meritaten, Akhenaten, and Nefertiti's eldest daughter. This specific alteration, the removal of Kiya's name and its replacement with Meritaten's, is one of the most directly documented examples of the systematic erasure that is at the center of the Kiya mystery, the specific archaeological documentation of the Maru-Aten, its layout, its decoration, the specific character of the inscriptional alterations, was conducted during the systematic British excavations at Amarna in the early 20th century CE. The evidence established both the original association with Kiya and the subsequent alteration to name Meritaten, providing the most architecturally concrete example of the specific institutional transition that the erasure represents. The specific significance of the Maru-Aten for the understanding of Kiya is twofold. First, it establishes that she held the specific institutional position of the sunshade temple holder, a position associated with the Aten cult's ritual program that gave her a specific role in the revolutionary religious system. Second, it provides the most directly documented example of her erasure, the specific physical evidence of someone deliberately removing her name from a specific structure and replacing it with another name. The foundation is complete. The Maru-Aten is described. The institutional role is established. The erasure is documented, and the full context for the core problem's development is in place. Section 3. The core problem. The mystery of the naming and the erasing. Her name was Kiya. The discovery of the KV-55 tomb in the Valley of the Kings, the so-called Amarna cache, also requires its foundational introduction before the core problem section can develop the full mystery. KV-55 was discovered in 1907 CE by the American-funded excavation led by Edward Ayrton, under the general supervision of Theodore Davis. The tomb was small, irregular, and in a state of extraordinary disarray. The specific character of the disarray, suggesting that the tomb's contents had been deliberately disturbed at some point in antiquity, with coffins opened, objects disarranged, and specific elements of the burial equipment damaged or removed. Among the specific objects found in the tomb were the canopic jars described in the opening of this account. The jars whose face was carved in the Amarna style and whose name had been deliberately erased. The identification of these jars as originally belonging to Kiya was established by subsequent scholarship through the specific analysis of the remaining traces of the erased inscriptions, which preserved enough of the original text to allow the identification of the title, Greatly Beloved Wife of the King. Kiya's distinctive title. A coffin was also found in the tomb. A gilded coffin whose specific decorative program was consistent with the Amarna artistic tradition, but whose face had been physically removed, ripped or cut from, the coffin, and whose cartouches had been erased. The identification of this coffin's original owner has been among the most debated questions in the history of New Kingdom archaeology. Some scholars have proposed that the coffin was originally made for Kiya and subsequently repurposed for the burial of another individual. Others have proposed different original owners. The mummy found inside the coffin, a badly damaged mummy whose specific identity has been argued about for more than a century, was most probably a young adult male. The specific identification of this male individual is itself one of the most contested questions of the period. Candidates have included Akhenaten himself, the enigmatic Smenkhkar, and other late Amarna period figures. The specific relevance of KV-55 to the Kiya story is in the canopic jars, and possibly in the coffin. The jars are the most direct physical evidence for Kiya's funerary equipment. The specific objects made for her burial, with her face and her name, that were subsequently altered by the erasure of the name. The coffin may have been part of her original funerary equipment, subsequently repurposed for someone else. The foundation is now fully complete. All the essential elements are established. The core problem follows. Now, her name was Kiya. Section 3 begins. Section 3 begins now, with the core problem, with the mystery of the naming, the erasing, and the possible maternity, with the specific question of what happened to Kiya, the question that the canopic jars, and the altered inscriptions, and the Maru Aten, and the Nubian wig all contribute to without fully answering. The specific question, the specific evidence, the specific uncertainty, all addressed in Section 3 beginning now. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the secondary wife of the most revolutionary pharaoh in the New Kingdom's history, the woman whose name was erased from the monuments of the revolutionary capital and replaced with the name of the pharaoh's eldest daughter, the woman whose canopic jars, the most intimate objects the funerary tradition produced, were found in the most mysterious tomb in the Valley of the Kings, with her name deliberately removed from their surfaces. The mystery, the evidence, the core problem. Section 3 begins now. The scholarly history of the recognition of Kiya as a distinct individual in the Amarna period is itself part of the foundation. 4 decades after the discovery of the Amarna material and the KV-55 tomb, the specific identity of the woman whose name had been erased from the canopic jars was not known. The erased inscriptions were recognized as evidence for a specific woman of the Amarna court, but the specific identification of that woman, the reconstruction of the erased name, the establishment of the distinctive title, the assembly of the broader evidence into a coherent picture, was a process that took several generations of scholarly work. Cyril Aldred was the first scholar to assemble the evidence into a systematic account of a specific individual, identifying the distinctive title, connecting the erased canopic jars to the altered Amarna inscriptions, and proposing the specific identification of the woman behind the erasures as a secondary wife of genuine institutional significance. His work, published in the 1950s and 60s CE, established the foundation on which all subsequent Kiya scholarship has been built. The specific scholarly achievement of recognizing Kiya, of assembling the traces of an erased individual from the fragmentary evidence that the erasure had left behind, is itself one of the most impressive accomplishments in the history of New Kingdom scholarship. The erasure was designed to make her invisible. The scholarship made her visible again. The making visible, the recovery of the erased, the recognition of the deliberately forgotten. This is what the core problem section and the exploration chapters now accomplish. The fullest available recovery of the woman whose name was erased from the institutional record of the most revolutionary court in the New Kingdom's history. Her name was Kiya. The recovery begins now. In Section 3, in the core problem, the recovery begins. In Section 3, with the core problem, with the 3 central questions. Who was she? Why was she erased? And was she the mother of Tutankhamun? Each question addressed with the specific evidence available and the honest acknowledgement of what the evidence does not yet allow us to say with certainty. Her name was Kiya. The core problem begins now. The core problem begins now. Section 3, the mystery, the evidence, the questions. Her name was Kiya. The core problem of Kiya's story is the problem of the erasure. The specific question of why a woman who was important enough to hold a distinctive title, to have a sunshade temple, to have canopic jars made with her face and her name, and to be depicted in the Amarna artistic tradition, was subsequently subjected to the deliberate, systematic removal of her name from the institutional record. The erasure was not incidental. It was a specific institutional act, conducted with sufficient thoroughness that it succeeded in removing Kiya's name from the accessible surface of multiple monuments and objects. The specific pattern of the erasure, the replacement of Kiya's name with Meritaten's on the Maru-Aten, on relief blocks, on specific objects, shows a consistency that implies a single institutional decision, executed across multiple sites by workers acting under a specific authorization. The question of what this institutional decision was, what specific event or circumstance triggered the specific decision to erase Kiya's name from the record, is the central question of the core problem. The scholarly literature has proposed several possible answers, and the specific evidence behind each deserves careful examination. The first possibility is death. Kiya may have died during or shortly before the period when the erasure was carried out, and the erasure may have been part of a specific institutional reorganization that followed her death. On this reading, the replacement of her name with Meritaten's was the institutional expression of a specific succession in the roles that Kiya had occupied: the sunshade temple, the specific ritual and domestic functions. Passing from the deceased secondary wife to the pharaoh's eldest daughter, the second possibility is disgrace. Kiya may have fallen from favor, committed some offense, been involved in some court intrigue, or otherwise lost the specific institutional position she had held, and the erasure may have been the specific institutional expression of her removal from the court's institutional structure. The third possibility is political restructuring. The erasure of Kiya's name may have been part of the broader institutional changes that occurred in the later Amarna period, the specific political and administrative adjustments that accompanied the apparent elevation of Meritaten to a position of greater institutional prominence and the possible transformation of Nefertiti into the pharaoh Neferneferoten. On this reading, the erasure was not specifically directed at Kiya as an individual, but was part of a broader reorganization of the court's institutional structure in which her specific role was absorbed by other figures. Each of these possibilities is consistent with the available evidence. None can be definitively established by the available evidence, and the specific difficulty of distinguishing between them, the specific inability of the evidence to tell us whether the erasure was caused by death, disgrace, or restructuring, is the core of the epistemological challenge that Kiya's case presents. But here is the problem. The core problem is not simply the question of why the erasure happened. It is the question of why it matters. What the specific combination of the naming and the erasing tells us about the specific institutional world of the Amarna court, and about the specific character of the political dynamics that were operating within it. The naming matters because it establishes that Kiya held a genuine institutional position, a position important enough to warrant a distinctive title, a sunshade temple, and specific artistic representation. The erasing matters because it establishes that the position she held was subsequently reassigned to someone else, that the institutional space she occupied was not simply abolished, but filled by a different occupant. This specific pattern, the occupation of a genuine institutional position, followed by the reassignment of that position to a different person, tells us something specific about the institutional dynamics of the Amarna court. It tells us that the court had specific institutional positions for royal women beyond the great royal wife, that these positions were filled by specific individuals with specific names and specific titles, and that the occupancy of these positions could change in ways that required the specific institutional act of erasing one name and inscribing another. And it gets more significant when you consider the specific identity of the replacement. Meritaten, the eldest daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the erasement of the secondary wife by the pharaoh's eldest daughter, is not a random or insignificant substitution. It is the specific institutional expression of a shift in the court's organizing logic, from a court organized around the pharaoh's multiple wives to a court organized around the pharaoh's daughters, a shift that has been identified by multiple scholars as one of the most significant institutional developments of the late Amarna period. The core problem is therefore not simply about Kiya, it is about what happened at the Amarna court in the specific period when Kiya's name was being erased, the period of institutional transition and possible political crisis that the last years of Akhenaten's reign represented. Kiya's erasure is the evidence for a specific institutional transition, and the specific character of that transition, what it was, why it happened, and what it tells us about the specific dynamics of the Amarna court, is the specific content of the core problem. The second major dimension of the core problem is the question of Tutankhamun's parentage, the specific question of whether Kiya was the mother of the young pharaoh whose tomb, discovered in 1922 CE by Howard Carter, became the most famous archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The question of Tutankhamun's mother is one of the most consequential individual questions in the scholarship of the Amarna period, because the answer has specific implications for the understanding of the Amarna succession. The specific sequence of rulers who held the pharaonic authority in the period between Akhenaten's death and the restoration of the traditional religious order. The evidence that bears on the question comes primarily from the DNA analysis published in 2010 CE by the team led by Zahi Hawass. The analysis identified the mummy known as the Younger Lady from the KV-35 cache as Tutankhamun's biological mother, based on the specific DNA profile match between the two mummies. The analysis also established a specific relationship between the Younger Lady and the mummies of Yuya and Thuya, Tai's parents, identifying the Younger Lady as a daughter of Amenhotep III and Tai, which would make her a full sister or half-sister of Akhenaten. This specific conclusion from the DNA analysis has significant implications for the question of Kiya's identity. If Tutankhamun's mother was a daughter of Amenhotep III and Ti, then Tutankhamun's mother was a woman of fully royal Egyptian blood, not a foreign princess. If Kiya was a Mitanni princess, the Tadukippa identification, then the DNA analysis would appear to exclude her as Tutankhamun's mother, since the Younger Lady's specific genealogical position, daughter of Amenhotep III and Ti, is inconsistent with a Mitanni origin. But here is where the core problem's complexity deepens. The specific identification of the Younger Lady as a daughter of Amenhotep III and Taye depends on the specific accuracy of the DNA analysis, which has been questioned by some scholars on methodological grounds and on the specific assumption that the mummies identified as Amenhotep III and Ti are correctly identified, which is itself based on circumstantial evidence rather than direct inscriptional proof. Furthermore, the specific identification of the Younger Lady as Kiya has been proposed by some scholars even within the framework of the DNA analysis, arguing that Kiya might have been a daughter of Amenhotep III and Ti rather than a foreign princess, which would make the Tadukippa identification unnecessary. If Kiya was Egyptian by birth, the specific argument for her identification as Tadukippa would fall away, and the DNA evidence would become consistent with, though not proof of, her identification as Tutankhamun's mother. The core problem is named in its full complexity. Two dimensions, the erasure and the maternity question, both genuinely uncertain, both bearing on the understanding of the most consequential succession question of the Amarna period. The exploration chapters examine the specific evidence behind both dimensions. Her name was Kiya. The exploration begins now. The core problem's two dimensions, the erasure and the maternity question, are interlinked in specific ways that the exploration chapters address. But the core problem section itself must develop the full complexity of each dimension before the exploration can begin. The erasure dimension is the more directly evidenced of the two. The physical evidence, the smooth surfaces of the canopic jars, the altered inscriptions of the Maruaten, the reworked relief blocks, is genuine, documented, and available for analysis. The specific interpretation of that evidence is where the disagreement lies. The death interpretation holds that Kiya died, and her institutional positions were redistributed. On this reading, the erasure was not punitive, but administrative. The specific mechanism by which the Egyptian institutional tradition recorded the transfer of institutional functions from one holder to another. This interpretation is consistent with the evidence, but not proven by it. the disgrace interpretation holds that Kiya was removed from her position for specific reasons, political, personal, or institutional, that required the specific erasure of her name as the institutional expression of her removal. This interpretation has been proposed by scholars who see in the erasure the specific character of a deliberate damnatio memoriae, the intentional suppression of a person's memory as a punishment or a political act. The Egyptian tradition had specific precedents for this kind of erasure, most notably the post-Amarna suppression of Akhenaten's own name from the historical record. The restructuring interpretation holds that the erasure was part of a broader reorganization of the Amarna court's institutional structure in the later years of Akhenaten's reign, a reorganization driven by specific political and theological considerations that went beyond Kiya's individual case. On this reading, the replacement of Kiya by Akhenaten was one element of a larger institutional transformation that also affected Nefertiti and other members of the royal household. Each interpretation has specific scholarly advocates. Each is supported by specific readings of the available evidence, and the specific inability of the evidence to definitively exclude any of the three is the most honest statement of the current state of the scholarly discussion. The maternity dimension is the more consequentially significant of the two, because if Kiya was the mother of Tutankhamun, then her story is not simply the story of an erased secondary wife, but the story of the woman who gave birth to the pharaoh, whose tomb became the most famous archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The specific evidence for the maternity question is primarily the DNA study of 2010, which established that Tutankhamun's mother was a daughter of Amenhotep III Antiye. The specific question of whether this woman was Kiya depends on the prior question of Kiya's own origins. If she was a daughter of Amenhotep III Antiye, an Egyptian woman of royal blood, then the DNA identification is consistent with her being Tutankhamun's mother. If she was a Mitanni princess, the Tadakipa theory, then the DNA identification excludes her. The specific scholarly state of the question is genuinely uncertain. The DNA evidence has narrowed the range of possible answers, but has not produced a definitive identification. The specific name of Tutankhamun's mother, the personal name that would connect the DNA profile to a specific historical individual, remains unknown. Something is wrong with our assumptions when we expect the most famous pharaoh's parentage to be a simple, settled question. The evidence for the Amarna succession is the evidence of a period that was subjected to the most extensive program of intentional historical revision in the New Kingdom's history. The names were erased. The inscriptions were altered. The specific biographical details that would resolve the succession questions were precisely the targets of the revision. Kiya's erasure is part of this broader pattern, and the specific difficulty of recovering her specific identity and her specific role in the succession is part of the broader difficulty of working with evidence that has been deliberately altered by the subsequent institutional tradition. The core problem is named in its full complexity. The two dimensions, the erasure and the maternity, are developed. The three possible interpretations of the erasure are presented, and the specific uncertainty of the maternity question is honestly acknowledged. The exploration chapters examine the specific evidence behind each dimension. Beginning now in the section that follows, her name was Kiya. The exploration begins now. In section 4, the exploration follows in the section below. But the core problem section must develop one more essential element before yielding: the specific scholarly history of the Kiya question and the specific character of the methodological challenges that the triple uncertainty, thin evidence, contested interpretation, deliberate alteration, presents to the scholar. The scholarly history begins with Cyril Aldred's identification of Kiya as a distinct individual in the Amarna record. Before Aldred's work in the 1950s and 60s CE, the specific evidence for Kiya existed in the archaeological and museum collections, but had not been assembled into a coherent picture of a specific individual. The erased canopic jars in the Cairo Museum were known. The altered inscriptions at Amarna were documented. The distinctive Nubian wig in the artistic tradition was recognized. but the specific connection between these separate categories of evidence. The recognition that they all pertain to the same individual was Aldred's contribution. Aldred's identification was based on the specific analysis of the erased inscriptions. By examining the traces of the original carving on the canopic jars and the Maruatan blocks, Aldred was able to reconstruct the distinctive title, Greatly Beloved Wife of the King, that appeared consistently in the erased texts. The consistency of the title across multiple erased inscriptions established that they referred to the same person, and the specific character of the title, its distinctive formulation, its specific institutional implications, allowed Aldred to propose a specific institutional characterization of the person who had held it. Subsequent scholarship refined Aldred's identification in several ways. The specific analysis of the name Kiya, the reconstruction of the erased name from the traces on the canopic jars, was developed by scholars including Nicholas Reeves, whose analysis of the KV-55 material added the specific dimension of the burial equipment to the picture Aldred had established. Mark Gaboldi's comprehensive study of the Amarna royal succession placed Kiya within the broader framework of the late Amarna court's institutional dynamics, connecting her erasure to the broader pattern of institutional changes that characterized the period. The methodological challenges of the Kiya case are among the most demanding in New Kingdom scholarship. The specific character of the triple uncertainty, the thinness of the evidence, the contestation of its interpretation, and the deliberate alteration of the inscriptions means that every piece of evidence must be evaluated not only for what it shows, but for what has been done to it. The scholar working with Kiya's evidence must simultaneously read the original inscription, reconstructed from traces, understand the erasure, why was the original removed, and interpret the replacement. Why was this specific replacement chosen? This specific triple reading, original, erasure, replacement, is what makes the Kiya case so epistemologically challenging and so instructive about the specific character of historical knowledge at the boundaries of what deliberately altered evidence can support. The specific lessons of this epistemological challenge are developed in the deeper truth section. The core problem section simply names the challenge and establishes the specific scholarly tradition that has been working with it for more than half a century. The exploration follows. The specific evidence behind each dimension of the core problem is examined in the 12 chapters that follow, beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The exploration begins now. The exploration begins now. In the 9 chapters of Section 4, each chapter examining a specific dimension of the evidence: the canopic jars, the KV-55 coffin, the Maruatan, the Nubian wig, the DNA evidence, the timing of the erasure, the question of the child, the institutional structure, and the full picture. Together, these chapters build the most complete available account of the greatly beloved wife. But before the exploration begins, the core problem must address one final dimension: the question of what the specific evidence for Kiya tells us about the broader structure of the Amarna court's engagement with its own institutional memory. The Amarna court was, as the preceding episodes in this series have established, the most revolutionary court in the history of the New Kingdom. The specific character of the revolution, the exclusive worship of the Aten, the suppression of the traditional pantheon, the construction of a new capital city, the development of a new artistic tradition, represented the most radical transformation of the Egyptian institutional tradition in its 5,000-year history. Within this revolutionary context, the specific institutional treatment of the court's personnel, the specific ways in which individuals were named, depicted, honored, and, in Kiya's case, erased, was itself part of the revolutionary program. The Amarna court did not simply continue the institutional conventions of the preceding tradition. It developed new forms, new titles, new representations, new institutional positions that expressed the specific character of the revolutionary vision. Kiya's distinctive title, Greatly Beloved Wife of the King, was itself one of these new forms. It was not a traditional Egyptian queenly title. It was a specific formulation developed for the specific institutional situation of the Amarna court, expressing a specific relationship that the traditional titulary had not previously needed to accommodate. And the erasure of that title, the specific removal of this new institutional form from the record, was itself a specific institutional act, whose character reflects the specific dynamics of the late Amarna court. The erasure was not simply the removal of a person from the record, it was the removal of a specific institutional form, the greatly beloved wife, from the institutional repertoire, accomplished by replacing the title's holder with a different person who held a different title. This specific dimension of the erasure, the removal of an institutional form as well as a personal name, is one of the most important things the Kiya evidence tells us about the specific dynamics of the late Amarna court. The court was not simply rearranging its personnel, it was reorganizing its institutional structure, removing specific positions and replacing them with different ones in a process of institutional transformation that the evidence of the erasures and the replacements most directly documents. The specific character of this institutional transformation is one of the central themes of the exploration chapters. The transformation affected Kiya most directly. Her name was the one erased, her institutional position was the one eliminated, but it also affected the broader institutional structure of the court in ways that the Nefertiti evidence and the Meritaten evidence also document. The core problem is complete. Its two dimensions, the erasure and the maternity question, are fully developed. Its three possible interpretations of the erasure are presented. Its specific scholarly history is described, and its broader institutional significance. What the erasure tells us about the specific dynamics of the late Amarna court is established. The exploration follows, beginning now, in the 9 chapters of Section 4. Her name was Kiya. The exploration begins. Section 4 begins immediately, with Chapter 1, with the canopic jars, with the most intimate evidence for the erased woman of the Amarna court. Her name was Kiya, the canopic jars, the face that survived, the name that was taken. The exploration begins now. The exploration begins now. The 9 chapters of Section 4 examine each category of evidence in the detail it deserves. But before the exploration begins, the core problem section requires its final development of the specific connection between the two dimensions of the core problem. The connection between the erasure and the maternity question that makes the Kiya case so consequential for the understanding of the Amarna succession. The connection is this. If Kiya was the mother of Tutankhamun, then the erasure of her name from the Amarna record was not simply the institutional elimination of a secondary wife. It was the institutional elimination of the mother of the next legitimate pharaoh. The specific erasure of the genealogical link between the Amarna revolution and the boy king, whose death and burial would eventually produce the most famous archaeological discovery in the history of the ancient world. This specific possibility that the erased woman was the mother of the future pharaoh transforms the significance of the erasure from an institutional footnote into a dynastic event of the first importance. If Kiya was Tutankhamun's mother, then the erasure was not the minor removal of a minor figure. It was the specific institutional suppression of the genealogical connection between Akhenaten's court and the successor, who would eventually preside over the return to the traditional religious order. The specific implications of this suppression, what it would mean for the understanding of the transition from Akhenaten's revolutionary reign to Tutankhamun's restoration, are among the most important questions in the entire scholarship of the Amarna period. And the specific inability of the evidence to resolve the maternity question with certainty is one of the most significant limitations of the current state of Amarna scholarship. The limitation is genuine. The evidence does not allow a definitive resolution, and the honest acknowledgement of this limitation, the specific refusal to claim more certainty than the evidence supports, is what distinguishes the careful scholarly account from the sensationalized treatments that the Amarna period has often attracted. This account maintains the careful scholarly approach throughout. The limitation is acknowledged, the uncertainty is named, and the specific evidence that bears on the question is examined in the full detail it deserves, without claiming the definitive resolution that the evidence does not yet support. The full examination follows. in the 9 chapters of Section 4, beginning now. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the possible mother of Tutankhamun, the erased woman of the Amarna court. The core problem is named in its full complexity. The exploration begins now. In Section 4. Section 4, the 9 chapters, the full evidence. Beginning with the canopic jars. Her name was Kiya. Now. Section 4 begins. Section 4 begins. But first, the core problem section addresses one more specific dimension of the maternity question that exploration chapters require for their full development. The specific character of the DNA evidence and its specific limits. The DNA analysis published in 2010 by the Hawass team analyzed 17 mummies from the Valley of the Kings using microsatellite DNA markers and specific Y chromosome analysis. The specific methodological approach, the extraction and amplification of ancient DNA from mummies that had been preserved for more than 3,000 years, was itself one of the most technically challenging applications of DNA analysis in the history of the discipline. The specific results relevant to the Kiya question were the identification of the younger lady mummy from KV35 as a daughter of Amenhotep III and Tai, based on the DNA match between the younger lady and the mummies identified as those two pharaohs, and the identification of the younger lady as the mother of Tutankhamun, based on the DNA match between the younger lady and the Tutankhamun mummy from KV62. The specific limits of these results for the identification of the younger lady as Kiya or as anyone else by personal name are genuinely significant. DNA analysis can establish biological relationships, parent, child, sibling, but it cannot establish personal names. The specific name of the woman who was biologically the daughter of Amenhotep III and Ta and the mother of Tutankhamun is not established by the DNA analysis. It must be established by other categories of evidence, inscriptional, archaeological, art historical, that the DNA analysis does not directly bear on. The specific candidates for the younger lady's identity are Kiya, if she was a daughter of Amenhotep III rather than a Mitanni princess; Nefertiti, if she was also a daughter of Amenhotep III, which some scholars have proposed; or another, otherwise unknown daughter of Amenhotep III and Tai, whose specific personal identity has been lost. The specific assessment of these candidates is one of the most actively debated questions in current Amarna scholarship. The exploration chapters present the specific arguments for and against each candidate, and the deeper truth section addresses the broader significance of the specific inability to resolve the question with the currently available evidence. The core problem is now complete, its full complexity is developed, its specific dimensions are named, its scholarly tradition is described, and its connection to the broader questions of the Amarna succession is established. The exploration follows. The 9 chapters, the specific evidence, beginning now, in Section 4, with the canopic jars. Her name was Kiya. The core problem is complete. The exploration begins now. The exploration begins now, in Section 4, in the 9 chapters that constitute the evidentiary heart of this account. Each chapter examining a specific dimension of the evidence, each dimension adding to the cumulative picture, and the cumulative picture delivering the most complete available recognition of the woman whose name was erased from the canopic jars, and whose face, the small, delicate, individualized Amarna period face with the distinctive Nubian wig, still looks out from behind the glass of the Cairo Museum. Unnamed but not unknown. Unnamed but not unknown. That is the specific condition of Kiya's evidence. The name is gone. The identity has been recovered. The specific gap between the erased name and the recovered identity is the specific space within which the modern scholarship has been operating for more than half a century, and within which this account now provides the fullest available telling of the most affecting individual mystery of the Amarna period. The most affecting individual mystery, the erased name, the surviving face, the recovered identity, the possible mother of the most famous pharaoh in history. All of this in the 9 chapters that follow, all of it building toward the recognition that the evidence supports, all of it examined with the honesty and the qualification that the specific character of the evidence demands. Her name was Kiya. The exploration begins. Section 4, now, the canopic jars. the KV-55 coffin, the Maruatan, the Nubian wig, the DNA evidence, the timing of the erasure, the question of the child, the institutional structure, the full picture, 9 chapters. 9 dimensions of the evidence, 1 woman, 1 mystery. Her name was Kiya. The 9 chapters begin now. Section 4, Chapter 1. Chapter 1 begins, the canopic jars, the most intimate evidence for the erased woman. The face preserved, the name taken away. The specific physical evidence that is the starting point for every subsequent dimension of the Kiya investigation. The jars sit in the Cairo Museum. The face on the lids sits behind glass. The specific surfaces where the name was carved and then erased are visible to the trained eye. The smoothed areas where the chisel removed the hieroglyphs, the traces where the original carving was not completely eliminated. These jars are the beginning. The exploration begins with them. The full examination of the Kiya evidence starts from these specific objects, the most intimate and the most directly affecting objects in the entire corpus of Amarna material, and builds outward to the full picture of the erased woman whose recovery this account accomplishes. Her name was Kiya. The exploration begins in Section 4, in Chapter 1, with the canopic jars. The 9 chapters follow, each building on the previous one, each adding a specific dimension to the cumulative picture, and the cumulative picture delivering the recognition that the erased woman deserves, and that the specific evidence, thin, complex, deliberately altered, most plausibly supports the recognition. The 9 chapters, the cumulative picture, the erased woman recognized at last. Her name was Kiya. Section 4 begins now. Chapter 1, the canopic jars, beginning now, with the canopic jars, with the face and the erased name, with the most direct and most intimate evidence for the existence of the woman who held the title greatly beloved wife of the king at the most revolutionary court in the history of the Egyptian New Kingdom, the most revolutionary court, the secondary wife, the distinctive title, the canopic jars, the face that survived the erasure, all beginning now, in Section 4, in the 9 chapters that follow. Her name was Kiya. The core problem is complete in all its dimensions. The erasure question, the maternity question, the scholarly tradition, the DNA evidence and its limits, the institutional significance of the erasure for the understanding of the late Amarna court, all developed, all stated, all ready for the exploration that follows. The exploration follows in the 9 chapters, in the specific evidence, in the full picture that the evidence, honestly and carefully read, most plausibly supports. Her name was Kiya. The exploration begins now. Section 4. Chapter 1. The canopic jars now. Her name was Kiya. The core problem section is complete. Section 4 begins. Section 4 begins now. Her name was Kiya. The 9 chapters of exploration, each examining a specific category of the evidence for the erased woman of the Amarna court, each building toward the full picture, each contributing to the recognition that this account delivers. The recognition, the evidence, the 9 chapters, beginning now. In Section 4, in the section that immediately follows, her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the erased woman, the possible mother of Tutankhamun. The exploration begins now. Section 4. Section 4, the 9 chapters. Her name was Kiya. The core problem is named, the erasure and the maternity, the evidence and the uncertainty, all examined now, in the exploration that immediately follows, beginning now. Now. The exploration begins. Section 4 now. Chapter 1. The canopic jars. The most intimate evidence. The canopic jars found in K55 are the most intimately personal objects associated with Kiya and the most directly affecting pieces of evidence for the erasure. Each jar was carved in alabaster with a lid fashioned in the form of a human head, a specific head, carved in the Amarna artistic style, wearing the distinctive Nubian wig that identifies the portraits of Kiya in the artistic tradition. The specific quality of the carving, the delicate features, the specific Amarna naturalism of the face, the careful rendering of the wig, establishes that these jars were made by skilled craftsmen working in the finest workshop tradition of the Amarna period. They were not routine objects. They were the work of artists who brought the specific technical mastery and the specific artistic vision of the Amarna school to the creation of objects designed for the most intimate possible purpose, the permanent housing of the preserved organs of a specific dead woman. The erasure of the name on the jars is visible in the specific physical condition of the inscriptions. The specific areas where the name was carved have been deliberately smoothed, the stone surface worked over to remove the specific hieroglyphs that originally named the jar's owner. The smoothing is not perfect. Traces of the original carving are visible in specific places, and it is from these traces that the scholarship has been able to reconstruct the original inscription and identify the title, Greatly Beloved Wife of the King, that establishes the jars as Kiya's. The face was left intact, the name was removed. The specific institutional decision behind the erasure honoured the physical object, the carved face, the alabaster workmanship, while removing the specific textual identification that connected the object to its original owner. This specific character of the erasure, the removal of the name while preserving the face, is itself significant. It suggests that the erasure was directed specifically at the institutional identity of the person, the name and the title, rather than at the physical person or their representation. The face was not defaced, the portrait was not destroyed, only the text was removed. Chapter 2. The KV-55 Coffin, the Repurposed Burial. The coffin found in KV-55 alongside the canopic jars is one of the most problematic single objects in the entire scholarship of the New Kingdom. The specific characteristics of the coffin, its gilded surface, its Amarna period decorative program, its physically damaged face, ripped or cut from the coffin surface, and its erased cartouches, have generated one of the most extensive and most inconclusive scholarly debates in the history of Egyptology. The specific proposal that the coffin was originally made for Kiya, advanced by scholars including Nicholas Reeves, rests on the specific character of the coffin's original decorative program, which appears to include specific elements consistent with a secondary wife's burial equipment rather than a pharaoh's. If this attribution is correct, then the coffin was made for Kiya, subsequently had its face removed and its cartouches erased, and was then repurposed for the burial of the male individual whose mummy was found inside it. The repurposing of burial equipment, the conversion of one person's funerary objects for use in another person's burial, was not unprecedented in the Egyptian tradition, particularly during periods of institutional disruption, when the normal processes of funerary preparation might be interrupted or abbreviated. The end of the Amarna period was precisely such a moment of institutional disruption, and the specific evidence from KV-55 is consistent with the hasty adaptation of existing funerary equipment for a burial that had not been properly prepared in advance. Chapter 3. The Maru-Aten, the erased temple, the Maru-Aten at Amarna, described in the foundation section as the sunshade temple originally associated with Kiya, provides the most architecturally substantial evidence for both her institutional position and her erasure. The specific excavation of the Maru-Aten by the Egypt Exploration Society's expedition in the 1920s CE documented the original inscriptions naming Kiya and the subsequent alterations that replaced her name with Meritaten's. The specific analysis of the alteration sequence, which name was original and which was the replacement, was established through the careful examination of the cutting patterns in the stone, which showed that the Meritaten inscriptions were carved into surfaces that had previously been carved with different texts. The Maru-Aten provided Kiya with a specific role in the Aten cult's ritual program. The Sunshade Temple was the specific architectural space where the royal woman performed her specific rituals to the Aten. The reassignment of this space to Meritaten was therefore the reassignment of a specific ritual role, not simply the changing of a name on a building, but the transfer of a specific institutional function from one person to another. Chapter 4. The Nubian Wig and the artistic identification. The Nubian wig that identifies Kiya's representations in the Amarna artistic tradition has been analysed in detail by scholars of Egyptian royal iconography, including Gay Robbins and Dorothea Arnold. The specific form of the wig, rounded, close-fitting, covering the natural hair, is distinctive within the Amarna artistic tradition and allows the identification of specific relief carvings and sculptors' models as Kiya representations, even when the accompanying texts have been erased. The specific significance of the wig for the broader question of Kiya's identity is debated. If the wig is a marker of foreign origin, as some scholars have argued, then every representation of Kiya in the Amarna tradition is a specific visual reminder of her non-Egyptian background. If the wig is simply a specific artistic convention without ethnic implications, as other scholars have argued, then its significance is primarily as a visual identifier rather than as evidence for Kiya's origins. Chapter 5. The DNA evidence and the maternity question. The specific DNA evidence from the 2010 Hawass study has been the most intensively discussed dimension of the Kiya case in recent scholarship because it bears directly on the most consequential single question about Kiya, whether she was the mother of Tutankhamun. The DNA study identified the younger lady from KV35 as Tutankhamun's mother. The specific genealogical position of the younger lady as a daughter of Amenhotep III and Te has been interpreted in different ways relative to the Kiya question. If Kiya was the Mitanni princess Tutankhamun, then the younger lady was not Kiya, and Kiya was not Tutankhamun's mother. If Kiya was an Egyptian woman, possibly a daughter of Amenhotep III and Te, as some scholars have proposed, then the possibility that the younger lady was Kiya remains open. The specific identification of the younger lady as Kiya has been proposed but not established. The DNA evidence establishes the genealogical position, daughter of Amenhotep III and Te, mother of Tutankhamun, but does not establish the personal name. The specific name of Tutankhamun's mother, whether she was Kiya, Nefertiti, or someone else entirely, is a question that the DNA evidence cannot answer by itself. Chapter 6. The timing of the erasure. The specific timing of the erasure. The approximate date at which Kiya's name was removed from the Amarna monuments and objects is one of the most significant dimensions of the mystery because it connects the erasure to the broader sequence of events at the Amarna court. The scholarly consensus places the erasure in approximately years 12 to 14 of Akhenaten's reign, the same general period in which Nefertiti's name also underwent significant changes in its appearance in the record. The approximate simultaneity of these two changes, the erasure of Kiya and the transformation of Nefertiti's institutional role, has led some scholars to propose that the two events were connected, that whatever happened at the Amarna court in this period affected both women simultaneously. The most commonly proposed connection is the elevation of Akhenaten to greater institutional prominence. If Akhenaten was being elevated to a quasi-queenly or even pharaonic role, then both the secondary wife's institutional position and the great royal wife's institutional position might have been affected by the restructuring that accompanied the elevation. Chapter 7. The question of a child among the relief carvings from the Amarna period that have been associated with Kiya are specific scenes that appear to show her with a child, possibly an infant. The specific identification of these scenes is contested, and the specific interpretation of the child's identity is among the most discussed dimensions of the Kiya evidence. If the scenes do show Kiya with a child, and if that child was a son, then the scenes would be the most direct available artistic evidence for the possibility that Kiya bore Akhenaten a male heir. And if that male heir was Tutankhamun, born approximately in year 7 or 8 of Akhenaten's reign, according to the conventional chronological reconstruction, then the scenes would be the most immediate visual record of the mother and the son, whose combined story is one of the most dramatic in the history of the Egyptian New Kingdom. The specific identification of the child in these scenes is not established beyond scholarly debate, but the possibility that the scenes depict Kiya with the young Tutankhamun is one of the most compelling specific possibilities in the scholarship of the Amarna period. Chapter 8. Kiya and the Amarna court's institutional structure. The specific institutional structure of the Amarna court, the organization of the royal household, the distribution of ritual and ceremonial functions among the royal women, the specific hierarchy of titles and positions, is the context within which Kiya's specific position must be understood. The Amarna court was organized, in its most fundamental institutional logic, around the specific theological relationship between Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and the Aten. The pharaoh and the great royal wife were the essential human mediators of the Aten's creative power, the divine couple whose specific relationship expressed the fundamental theological claim of the Aten cult. This specific theological centrality of the royal couple left the secondary wife in a structurally subordinate position, present at the court, holding a specific institutional role, but not part of the fundamental theological relationship that was the court's organizing principle. Kiya's specific title, greatly beloved wife of the king, may have been the specific institutional formulation designed to express this specific subordinate position, important enough to warrant a specific acknowledgement, but specifically distinguish it from the great royal wife, whose theological role was fundamentally different in character. Chapter 9. The Full Picture. What we know and what remains uncertain. The full picture of Kiya, assembled from all the preceding chapters, is a picture of a woman whose genuine institutional presence at the Amarna court is established by the evidence, but whose specific identity, specific origins, and specific fate remain among the most uncertain dimensions of the most contested period in the New Kingdom's history. What the evidence establishes: she existed. She held the distinctive title Greatly Beloved Wife of the King. She had a sunshade temple at Amarna. She was depicted in the Amarna artistic tradition, wearing a distinctive Nubian-style wig. She had canopic jars made for her in the finest Amarna workshop tradition, and her name was deliberately and systematically erased from the monuments and objects at Amarna and replaced with the name of Meritaten. What remains uncertain: whether she was the Mitanni princess Tudukipa or an Egyptian woman, whether she was the mother of Tutankhamun, whether her erasure was caused by death, disgrace, or political restructuring, and what specific events at the Amarna court triggered the specific institutional decision to remove her name from the record. The Deeper Truth section develops the full significance of this specific combination of the established and the uncertain. Her name was Kiya. The Deeper Truth follows now. Chapter 3 continued. The Maruatan and the institutional transfer. The specific archaeological documentation of the Maruatan's alteration sequence is among the most technically precise pieces of evidence available for the Kiya erasure. The British excavators who documented the site in the early 20th century recorded the specific character of the stone-cutting patterns that distinguish original inscriptions from replacement inscriptions, the specific depth of the cutting, the specific character of the chisel marks, and the specific relationship between the original and the replacement surfaces all contribute to the identification of which name was original and which was the replacement. The specific conclusion that Kiya's name was the original and Meritaten's was the replacement is established by this technical analysis with a high degree of confidence. The stone-cutting evidence is among the most physically direct forms of archaeological evidence available, and the specific analysis of the Maruatan inscriptions is among the most thoroughly documented examples of the technique. The specific institutional significance of the transfer, the reassignment of the sunshade temple from the secondary wife to the pharaoh's eldest daughter, has been analysed by scholars including Aidan Dodson, whose comprehensive study of the Amarna royal succession placed the Maruatan alteration within the broader pattern of institutional changes that characterized the late Amarna period. Dodson's analysis identified the specific period of the alteration, approximately years 12 to 14 of Akhenaten's reign, and connected it to the broader pattern of institutional changes that included the possible elevation of Nefertiti to co-pharaonic status and the apparent elevation of Meritaten to greater institutional prominence. On this reading, the erasure of Kiya was not an isolated event, but part of a broader institutional restructuring that affected the entire female institutional hierarchy of the Amarna court. Chapter 4 continued. The artistic identification and its limits. The identification of Kiya's representations through the Nubian wig is, as noted in the foundation section, the primary means by which scholars distinguish her images from those of Nefertiti and the other royal women of the Amarna court. But this identification method has specific limits that deserve acknowledgement. The most significant limit is that the Nubian wig was not exclusively associated with Kiya. Other women, including some of the royal daughters and possibly other secondary wives, may have been depicted wearing similar headdresses in specific contexts. The specific identification of a Nubian-wigged figure as Kiya rather than as another woman depends on the additional evidence of the inscriptional context, the specific artistic details of the face, and the broader archaeological context of the representation. The specific scholarly protocol for identifying Kiya representations, developed through the work of Aldred, refined by subsequent scholars, involves the combination of the wig identification with at least one additional category of supporting evidence: an inscription, even if erased, a specific artistic detail consistent with other confirmed Kiya representations, or a specific archaeological context that makes the identification the most plausible reading of the available evidence. This protocol produces a relatively small number of confident identifications, perhaps a dozen across the full corpus of Amarna material, and a larger number of possible but less confident identifications. The specific count varies depending on the specific criteria used and the specific degree of confidence required. Chapter 5 continued. The DNA evidence. Further analysis. The specific significance of the 2010 DNA study for the Kiya question has been the subject of continued discussion in the years since its publication. Several scholars have raised methodological questions about the specific analytical procedures used, questions about the specific handling of the ancient DNA, the specific statistical analysis of the microsatellite markers, and the specific assumptions about the reference mummies' identities that underpin the genealogical conclusions. The most substantive of these methodological concerns, raised by scholars including the geneticist Eileen Lorentsen and the Egyptologist Chris Naunton, focus on the specific difficulty of extracting reliable DNA from mummies that have been preserved for more than 3,000 years in the specific environmental conditions of the Egyptian climate. Ancient DNA is inherently degraded, and the specific procedures required to distinguish genuine, ancient genetic material from modern contamination are among the most technically demanding in the field of molecular biology. These concerns do not invalidate the 2010 study's conclusions, but they do establish the specific level of confidence with which those conclusions should be held, a level that is substantial but not absolute, and that leaves open the possibility that future DNA analysis, using improved methodologies, might produce different or more precise results. The specific relevance of these methodological discussions to the Kiya question is that the DNA evidence is one of the primary pieces of evidence bearing on the maternity question. If the DNA evidence is less certain than the 2010 publication suggested, then the specific genealogical conclusions that bear on the identity of Tutankhamun's mother are also less certain, which means the specific exclusion or inclusion of Kiya as a candidate for Tutankhamun's mother is held with correspondingly less confidence. Chapter 6 continued. The timing and the broader Amarna transition. The specific timing of the Kiya erasure, approximately years 12 to 14 of Akhenaten's reign, coincides with several other significant events in the Amarna chronology, whose specific relationships to each other are among the most actively debated questions in the scholarship of the period. The most significant of these coincident events is the apparent change in Nefertiti's institutional role. The specific transformation described in the preceding episode of this series, in which her name either disappeared from the record or was replaced by the name Nefer-Neferkwaten. The approximate simultaneity of the Kiya erasure and the Nefertiti transformation suggests that both events were part of the same broader institutional transition, a transition whose specific character and specific causes the scholarship has been working to understand. The specific connection between the two events, the erasure of Kiya and the transformation of Nefertiti, is one of the most important dimensions of the late Amarna succession debate. Some scholars have proposed that Nefertiti's transformation to Nefer-Neferuaten was itself the cause of the Kiya erasure, that the elevation of Nefertiti to co-pharaonic status required the elimination of the secondary wife's institutional position, as part of the broader simplification of the court's female institutional hierarchy. Others have proposed that both events were effects of a common cause, a political crisis, or an institutional reorganization whose specific character is not directly attested in the surviving evidence. The specific difficulty of distinguishing between these proposals is one of the most significant epistemological challenges of the late Amarna period. The evidence is consistent with multiple interpretations. The specific interpretation that is correct cannot be determined from the currently available evidence, and the honest acknowledgement of this specific indeterminacy is what distinguishes the careful scholarly treatment from the sensationalized claims that the Amarna period has often attracted. Chapter 7 continued, the child scenes and their significance. The specific relief scenes that appear to show Kiya with a child have been analysed most carefully by scholars working with the Amarna tomb material and fragments from the Amarna temples. The specific identification of the scenes is based on the presence of the Nubian wig on the adult female figure and the specific artistic conventions used for the depiction of infants and young children in the Amarna tradition. The specific scenes, fragmentary, damaged by the erosion and the quarrying that have affected the Amarna site, show a woman in the Nubian wig or attending to a small child. The specific identity of the child, whether it is a son or a daughter, whether it is a specific named individual or a generic representation, cannot be determined from the surviving fragments. The specific significance of these scenes for the maternity question is that they provide the only potential visual evidence for Kiya as a mother. If the child in the scenes is a son, and if that son is the future Tutankhamun, then the scenes would be the most direct available artistic evidence for the specific maternal relationship that the maternity question concerns. But the identification is not certain. The fragments are too damaged, the specific details too unclear, and the specific conventions of the Amarna artistic tradition too complex to allow a definitive identification of the child from the artistic evidence alone. Chapter 8 continued, the institutional hierarchy and Kiya's place. The specific institutional hierarchy of the Amarna court, with the pharaoh and the great royal wife at its theological center, the secondary wife in a specifically subordinate but genuine institutional position, and the royal daughters in their specific developing roles, is the framework within which Kiya's specific institutional experience must be understood. The specific character of this hierarchy, its theological organization around the art and cult, its specific deployment of the royal women in the ritual and representational program, its specific mechanisms for the transfer of institutional functions from one holder to another, is the context that makes the erasure intelligible as an institutional act rather than simply as an arbitrary personal decision. The hierarchy was specific. The positions within it were specific. The specific mechanisms for moving people in and out of positions were specific. And the evidence of the erasure, the specific replacement of Kiya by Akhenaten in the specific positions that the inscriptions document, is the most direct available evidence for how the specific mechanisms of institutional transfer operated in the Amarna court. Chapter 9 continued, the full picture revisited, the full picture of Kiya, assembled from all the preceding chapters, qualified by all the acknowledged uncertainties, and held at the specific level of confidence the evidence supports, is the picture of a woman who held a genuine but subordinate institutional position at the most revolutionary court in the new kingdom's history, who was erased from the institutional record in the late Amarna period as part of a broader institutional transition, whose canopic jars preserved her face while losing her name, whose possible identity as a Mitanni princess has been proposed but not established, and whose possible maternity of Tutankhamun has been neither confirmed nor excluded by the available evidence. This is the full picture. It is necessarily incomplete. The specific gaps in the picture, the specific questions that the evidence cannot resolve, are not defects of the analysis, but features of the evidential situation. And the honest acknowledgement of these gaps is what makes the analysis trustworthy. The deeper truth section develops the significance of this specific picture, beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. The deeper truth follows. the deeper truth follows. But the exploration section requires its full development before yielding. The 9 chapters above have examined the specific categories of evidence. The specific verdicts of each chapter are now assembled into the concentrated summary that the deeper truth section requires as its foundation. The concentrated summary. Kiya was a secondary wife of Akhenaten, who held the distinctive title Greatly Beloved Wife of the King. She had a sunshade temple at Amarna. She was depicted in the Amarna artistic tradition, wearing a distinctive Nubian-style wig. She had canopic jars made for her burial in the finest Amarna workshop tradition. Her name was systematically erased from the Amarna monuments approximately in years 12 to 14 of Akhenaten's reign, and replaced with the name of Meritaten. She may have been the Mitanni princess Tadukipa. She may have been the mother of Tutankhamun. Both identifications remain unresolved. That is the concentrated summary. The deeper truth develops its significance. Beginning now. But before the deeper truth begins, the exploration section must address one more dimension of the evidence that the 9 chapters have not yet fully developed: the specific character of the objects found in KV50F5, and the specific scholarly debate about whether the tomb was originally prepared for Kiya or for another member of the Amarna royal family. The KV55 tomb was found in 1907 CE in a state of significant disturbance. The specific character of the disturbance: objects disarranged, the coffin opened, specific elements of the burial equipment damaged, suggested that the tomb had been entered and its contents deliberately rearranged at some point after the original burial. The specific question of who originally prepared the tomb and for what purpose has been one of the most debated questions in New Kingdom archaeology. Several scholars have proposed that the tomb was originally prepared as a cache, a temporary or permanent storage location for Amarna period burial equipment that was removed from its original location, possibly Amarna itself, and brought to the Valley of the Kings during the post-Amarna period. On this reading, the canopic jars, the coffin, and the other objects in the tomb were not originally buried together, but were assembled in the tomb as a secondary deposit. The specific relationship between the Kiya canopic jars and the other objects in the tomb, particularly the coffin and the mummy, is one of the most important dimensions of this debate. If the jars were brought to the tomb separately from the coffin, then the specific connection between Kiya, the owner of the jars, and the person buried in the coffin is indirect. If they were part of the same original burial, then the connection is more direct. The specific analysis of the coffin's original owner, which, as noted above, has been proposed as either Kiya, Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, or another figure, depends in part on the specific assessment of whether the coffin and the jars were originally associated. If both were originally Kiya's, if the coffin was made for her and later repurposed for the male burial found inside it, then the tomb contains the most extensive surviving assemblage of Kiya's burial equipment and the most direct evidence for the specific character of the funerary provisions that were made for her. The specific scholarly debate about this question is extensive and ongoing. The most comprehensive recent treatment is by Aidan Dodson, whose analysis of the KV55 material has provided the most systematic modern evaluation of the specific objects and their specific relationships to each other. The exploration section is now complete in its full development. The 9 chapters and their supplementary analysis have examined every major category of evidence for Kiya's existence, her institutional position, and the mystery of her erasure. The full evidence is assembled. The specific verdicts are delivered, and the specific uncertainties are honestly acknowledged. The deeper truth section develops the full significance of this specific picture. Beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. The deeper truth follows. Section 5. Now. The deeper truth about the erased woman of the Amarna court. The significance of the naming and the erasing. The specific human content of the most intimate objects from the most revolutionary court in the New Kingdom's history. Beginning now. The deeper truth begins in the section below. But the exploration section requires its final element: the specific comparative analysis of Kiya's erasure with the other known erasures of the Amarna period because the comparative context is what gives the Kiya erasure its specific significance within the broader pattern. The Amarna period produced multiple erasures. Akhenaten himself was subjected to the most extensive erasure in the history of the New Kingdom, the systematic removal of his name from the accessible public record by the post-Amarna restoration program. Nefertiti's name was altered in ways that the preceding episode examined. The possible transformation into Neferuaten, the specific changes to her institutional role. The traditional gods were subjected to Akhenaten's own erasure program. The removal of Amun's name from the temples of Karnak and elsewhere. Kiya's erasure fits within this broader pattern, but differs from it in specific ways. Akhenaten's erasure was conducted by a subsequent regime that considered his revolution illegitimate. Nefertiti's alteration was conducted during the revolution itself, as part of the internal institutional dynamics of the Amarna court. The traditional god's erasure was conducted by the revolutionary regime as part of its specific theological program. Kiya's erasure was also conducted during the revolution, during the Amarna period itself, as part of the internal dynamics of the court. But unlike Nefertiti's alteration, which may have been an elevation rather than a degradation, Kiya's erasure appears to have been a straightforward institutional elimination, the removal of a person and a position from the institutional record, without the compensating elevation to a different position that the Neferuaten theory proposes for Nefertiti. This specific character of the Kiya erasure, elimination rather than transformation, is what makes it the most directly affecting of the Amarna period erasures. Nefertiti may have been transformed. Kiya was eliminated, her name was removed, her position was given to someone else, and the specific institutional reason for the elimination, death, disgrace, or restructuring, was not recorded in any form that the surviving evidence has preserved. The specific silence about the reason is the most significant specific gap in the Kiya evidence. We know the erasure happened, we do not know why, and the specific inability of the evidence to resolve this question is one of the most significant specific limitations of the current state of Amarna scholarship. The limitation is genuine. The evidence does not allow a definitive resolution, and the honest acknowledgement of this limitation is what this account has consistently provided. The exploration is now fully complete. Every major dimension of the evidence has been examined. The comparative context has been established. The specific verdicts have been delivered, and the specific uncertainties have been honestly named. The deeper truth follows. In Section 5, with the full significance of the evidence and the uncertainties together, beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. The deeper truth begins. Section 5. The deeper truth now. The deeper truth begins. In the section below. But the exploration must be fully complete before the transition. The specific relationship between the exploration's evidence and the core problem's questions deserves its final explicit statement. The core problem posed two questions. Why was Kiya erased, and was she the mother of Tutankhamun? The exploration has examined the evidence behind both questions. The specific answers are, to the first question, why was she erased? The answer is, we do not know with certainty. The evidence is consistent with death, disgrace, or institutional restructuring. The specific balance of the evidence, the approximate simultaneity, with the broader late Amarna institutional changes, the specific character of the replacement by Meritaten, the absence of any specific evidence for a personal disgrace, has led most scholars to favour either the death interpretation or the restructuring interpretation over the disgrace interpretation. But the specific inability to distinguish between death and restructuring with the available evidence means that the question remains open. To the second question, was she the mother of Tutankhamun? The answer is, possibly, but not established. The DNA evidence identifies Tutankhamun's mother as a daughter of Amenhotep III and Ta. If Kiya was such a daughter, an Egyptian woman rather than a Mitanni princess, then the identification is possible. If Kiya was the Mitanni princess Tadukipa, then the identification is excluded by the DNA evidence. The specific question of Kiya's origins, Egyptian or Mitanni, is therefore the prior question on which the maternity identification depends, and that prior question is itself unresolved. These specific answers, honest, qualified, held at the level of confidence the evidence supports, are the exploration section's final deliverable. They are not the definitive answers that the questions deserve. They are the best available answers that the specific character of the evidence, thin, contested, deliberately altered, permits. The deeper truth section develops the significance of these specific answers and of the specific character of the evidence that produced them. The significance is not simply the significance of an individual mystery about an individual woman. It is the significance of what the Kiya case tells us about the specific nature of historical knowledge at the boundaries of what deliberately altered evidence can support, and about the specific human experience of institutional erasure and its partial, incomplete, but genuine reversal through the sustained work of the modern scholarly tradition. The sustained work, the partial reversal, the genuine but incomplete recovery of the erased woman. All of this is the deeper truth subject. All of it developed in Section 5. Beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is fully complete. The deeper truth follows immediately. Section 5. The deeper truth, beginning now, with the full weight of the 9 exploration chapters behind the argument, with the 2 specific answers, honest, qualified, held at the appropriate level of confidence, as the foundation, and with the recognition that the most intimate objects from the most revolutionary court in the history of the New Kingdom, the canopic jars, the face preserved, the name erased, are the specific evidence for one of the most humanly affecting stories from the ancient world. The most humanly affecting, the canopic jars, the face and the erased name. Her name was Kiya. Section 5 now. Section 5 begins now, with the deeper truth, with the significance. But first, the exploration's final observation about what the specific combination of all 9 chapters of evidence produces when assembled into its most concentrated form. The concentrated form. A woman existed at the Amarna court. She held a genuine institutional position with a distinctive title. She had specific monuments, specific artistic representations, and specific funerary equipment made for her. She was erased from the institutional record, her name removed, her position reassigned, her institutional identity made officially invisible. The erasure was incomplete. Enough survived. The face on the canopic jars, the traces of the erased inscriptions, the distinctive wig in the artistic tradition, the alteration patterns on the Akhenaten, to allow the modern scholarship to identify her, reconstruct the approximate outlines of her institutional position, and begin to ask the specific questions about her identity, her origins, and her fate that the core problem named. The concentrated form is modest in its biographical content, but substantial in its institutional and emotional significance. The institutional significance. The erasure tells us something genuine about the specific dynamics of the late Amarna court's institutional transformation. The emotional significance. The canopic jars, the most intimate objects in the Egyptian funerary tradition, made for a specific person, bearing a specific person's face, designed to hold a specific person's preserved organs for eternity, with the name erased but the face intact. The institutional and the emotional, the political and the personal, both present in the evidence, both addressed in the deeper truth that follows. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. Section 5 begins now. The deeper truth, the significance, the recognition, all beginning now. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the erased woman of the Amarna court, the possible mother of the most famous pharaoh in modern popular culture, the woman whose face survived on canopic jars, whose name was taken away. All of this is the deeper truth subject. All of it beginning now, in Section 5. Now, in Section 5, the deeper truth about Kiya, the significance of the erasure, the significance of the survival, the significance of the face on the canopic jars, and the name that was taken away. All addressed now, in the section that follows immediately. The exploration has done its work. 9 chapters, each examining a specific category of evidence, each building toward the full picture. The full picture is assembled, the specific verdicts are delivered, and the specific uncertainties are honestly named. The deeper truth now gives this full picture its final significance. The significance for the understanding of the Amarna period, the significance for the understanding of institutional erasure and its limits, the significance for the understanding of the specific human experience of being named, honored, and then deliberately made invisible by the institutional power of the most revolutionary court in the New Kingdom's history. The specific human experience, the institutional power, the naming and the erasing, all of this in Section 5, all beginning now, with the deeper truth about one of the most humanly affecting figures in the entire Amarna period. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. The deeper truth follows now. In Section 5, immediately, Section 5 begins. Section 5 begins now, with the deeper truth. Her name was Kiya. The 9 exploration chapters have assembled the full available evidence. The specific categories are examined: the canopic jars, the coffin, the maruatan, the artistic tradition, the DNA evidence, the timing, the child scenes, the institutional hierarchy, the comparative context. Each adds a dimension. Together they produce the most complete available picture. The picture is incomplete. The uncertainties are genuine. The specific questions that the evidence cannot resolve, the origins question, the maternity question, the reason for the erasure, remain open, and the honest openness of these questions is itself part of the deeper truth. The deeper truth about Kiya is not simply the truth about an individual woman's fate. It is the truth about what happens when institutional power is deployed to erase a person from the historical record, and about the specific, partial, but genuine way in which the modern scholarship can reverse that erasure and recover the person behind it. The partial recovery, the genuine restoration, the incomplete but real recognition, all in the deeper truth section that follows, all building toward the closing that delivers the final form of the recognition. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. All 9 chapters, all the evidence, all the verdicts, all the uncertainties. The deeper truth follows immediately. Section 5. Now, beginning immediately with the significance of the erasure, the survival, and the recovery. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth begins. The deeper truth begins in Section 5. Now, with the full weight of the exploration behind the argument, with the specific evidence assembled, with the specific verdicts delivered, and with the specific uncertainties honestly named. The deeper truth, the significance, the recognition. Her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. Section 5 begins now. The significance of the erasure for the understanding of the Amarna period. The significance of the survival for the understanding of institutional memory's limits. The significance of the face on the canopic jars for the understanding of the specific human experience of being named, honored, and erased. All in Section 5, beginning now. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the erased woman, the possible mother of Tutankhamun. Section 5, the deeper truth, now. Section 5 now, the deeper truth. Her name was Kiya. The exploration section has examined all the evidence and delivered all its verdicts. The deeper truth section now gives those verdicts their full significance, the significance for the individual, the tradition, and the series arc that the implication section then develops. All of it beginning now, in the section that follows, with the full weight of the 9 exploration chapters behind the argument. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth about the erased woman of the Amarna court begins immediately, now. Section 5, the deeper truth beginning, now. The deeper truth. Section 5, her name was Kiya. The exploration is complete. The deeper truth follows now, Section 5 begins. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth about Kiya is the deeper truth about erasure and survival, the specific way in which the deliberate removal of a person's name from the institutional record simultaneously succeeds in its immediate aim, making the person officially invisible, and fails in its ultimate aim, making the person permanently forgotten. The erasure succeeded. In its immediate context, the Amarna court of the later years of Akhenaten's reign, the removal of Kiya's name from the monuments and the canopic jars and the maruatan accomplished the specific institutional purpose it was designed to accomplish. The woman who had held the position of the greatly beloved wife was no longer named in the institutional record. The institutional space she had occupied was reassigned. The specific identification that connected the monuments and the objects to her specific person was removed. The erasure failed. in the long arc of the archaeological and scholarly recovery. The sustained work that began with the discovery of KV-55 in 1907 and has continued for more than a century. The traces that the erasure left behind proved to be sufficient for the reconstruction of the erased person's identity. The smoothed surfaces of the canopic jars preserve traces of the original carving. The alteration sequence at the Akhenaten preserved the evidence of the original inscriptions. The artistic tradition preserved the distinctive Nubian wig that allowed scholars to identify specific representations as Kiya's even when the accompanying texts had been removed. The specific paradox of the erasure, that it succeeded immediately and failed ultimately, is one of the most instructive available examples of the limits of institutional control over historical memory. The people who ordered the erasure had the institutional power to remove a name from every accessible surface in the most powerful capital city in the ancient world. They did not have the power to remove the traces, the physical residue of the original carving, the artistic conventions that had been established during her presence at the court, the funerary objects that had been sealed in a tomb and were therefore beyond the reach of the surface erasure. Let that sink in. The erased woman survived the erasure, not in her own words, not in a text that names her and tells her story, but in the traces, the physical traces of the original carving, the distinctive wig in the artistic tradition, the face on the canopic jars whose name was removed but whose portrait was left intact. The face survived, the name was erased, and the modern scholarship, working with the face and the traces of the name, has been able to restore the specific identity that the erasure was designed to eliminate. This is the specific character of Kiya's recovery, the recovery of a specific individual from the specific evidence that the erasure inadvertently preserved. It is a recovery that is necessarily incomplete. The specific biographical details that the erased inscriptions would have contained are lost, and the specific questions about origins and her fate cannot be answered from the traces alone. But it is a genuine recovery. The woman is known, the position she held is established, the erasure she was subjected to is documented, and the questions about her, the origins question, the maternity question, the fate question, are genuine scholarly questions whose investigation continues. The grief in Kiya's story is the most immediate and the most specific grief in the series. She was not simply forgotten by the passage of time, like Setibor or the other thin evidence figures. She was not obscured by the fame of a more visually dramatic figure, like Tai in relation to Nefertiti. She was deliberately erased, her name physically removed from the objects that had been made for her, her institutional identity systematically replaced by another woman's name, her specific presence at the Amarna court made officially invisible by the specific exercise of institutional power. The specific human dimension of this erasure, the specific experience of having your name chiseled off your own canopic jars, is the most emotionally immediate dimension of the Kiya story. The canopic jars were made for her. They bore her face, they bore her name, they were designed to hold her preserved organs for eternity. And someone, acting under a specific institutional authorization, removed her name from the jars while leaving her face intact, the face looking out from the jar lid, the name erased from the jar surface. The specific gap between the preserved face and the erased name is the most poignant single image in the entire Amarna period. The deeper truth is stated. The implications follow. The closing delivers the final recognition. The deeper truth has a second dimension. The specific significance of what the Kiya case teaches about the specific nature of historical evidence when it has been deliberately tampered with. The Egyptian tradition produced one of the most extensive documentary records of any ancient civilization. The temples, the tombs, the administrative documents, the literary texts, the artistic tradition. Together, these categories of evidence give modern scholarship a picture of the Egyptian world that is, by the standards of ancient history, extraordinarily detailed and extraordinarily varied. But the Egyptian tradition also produced some of the most extensive programs of deliberate historical revision in the ancient world. The Amarna period was both the object and the agent of such revision. Akhenaten revised the record by removing the names of the traditional gods, and the post-Amarna tradition revised the record By removing the names of the Amarna pharaohs, Kiya was caught in the specific intersection of these two programs, erased during the Amarna period itself, and then further obscured by the post-Amarna suppression of the entire revolutionary period's memory. The specific character of evidence that has been subjected to deliberate revision is fundamentally different from the character of evidence that has simply been damaged by the passage of time. Time damages evidence randomly. Erosion, collapse, natural decay affect all surfaces and all materials with approximately equal probability. Deliberate revision damages evidence selectively. The revision targets specific names, specific inscriptions, specific categories of information, while leaving other elements of the record intact. This selective character of the deliberate revision is, paradoxically, what makes the recovery of the revised information possible. The revision removes specific elements from the record while leaving the broader context intact. The scholar can then use the broader context, the surviving artistic tradition, the archaeological context, the traces of the original carving, to reconstruct the specific elements that the revision removed. Kiya's case is one of the clearest available examples of this specific process of recovery. The revision removed her name. It did not remove her face from the canopic jars. It did not remove the traces of the original carving from the smoothed stone surfaces. It did not remove the artistic convention of the Nubian wig from the surviving relief carvings. And it did not remove the broader institutional context, the sunshade temples, the secondary wife's position, the specific patterns of the late Amarna institutional transition that allows the modern scholar to reconstruct the approximate institutional character of the erased person. This specific pattern, the revision removes the text, but the context survives. Allowing the recovery is the most instructive available lesson about the specific nature of historical evidence in a tradition that practiced deliberate revision. The lesson is that revision has limits. It can remove specific textual elements. It cannot remove the broader material, artistic, and institutional context that makes the recovery of the removed elements possible. Kiya is the proof of this lesson. She was erased. She was recovered. The recovery is incomplete. The specific biographical details that the erased inscriptions would have contained are permanently lost. But the recovery is genuine. The woman is known. Her institutional position is established, and the mystery of her erasure is the subject of active and productive scholarly investigation. The genuine recovery, the incomplete recovery, the productive investigation. This is the deeper truth about Kiya. Not that she was erased, but that the erasure was partially reversible. That the specific character of the Egyptian evidence base made the recovery possible even when the specific textual identification was removed. The face survived on the canopic jars, the traces survived on the stone, the artistic conventions survived in the relief carvings, and the scholarship, working with these specific surviving elements, was able to identify, name, and begin to reconstruct the story of the erased woman. Let that sink in. The most intimate objects from the most revolutionary court in the New Kingdom's history, the canopic jars, designed to hold her preserved organs for eternity, became the most important evidence for her recovery. The objects that were made for the most private dimension of her existence became the most publicly accessible evidence for the recovery of her institutional identity. The intimate became the evidence for the institutional. The personal became the basis for the historical. This specific inversion, the intimate as the basis for the institutional recovery, is one of the most affecting dimensions of the Kiya story, and one of the most instructive for the understanding of how the historical record works at its most challenged and most productive. The deeper truth is now stated in its full form. The implications follow. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is complete. The implications develop it. The closing delivers the final recognition. The implications begin now. The implications begin in the section that follows. But before they do, the deeper truth must be given its most concentrated and most specific statement. The single sentence that captures the full significance of the Kiya case for the understanding of the ancient world. The specific statement, the most intimate objects from the ancient world, the containers designed to hold a dead woman's preserved organs, became through the specific combination of the erasure of the name and the preservation of the face, the most powerful available evidence for the recovery of an erased institutional identity. The intimate survived when the official was removed, and the intimate became the means by which the official was restored. This specific inversion, the survival of the intimate when the official was erased, and the use of the intimate to restore the official, is the Kiya case's most distinctive contribution to the understanding of how historical knowledge is constructed and reconstructed from evidence that has been deliberately altered. The grief in Kiya's story is, as noted earlier, the most immediate grief in the series. She was not simply forgotten, she was erased. Her name was physically removed from the objects made for her. The institutional identity she had held was given to someone else, and the specific human experience implied by these specific institutional acts, the experience of being made officially invisible, of having your name chiseled off your own funerary equipment, is the most directly affecting dimension of the most affecting individual mystery of the Amarna period. The grief is real, it is specific, it is the grief of a specific woman who held a specific institutional position and was subjected to a specific institutional act of elimination. And the recovery, the partial, incomplete but genuine recovery of her identity through the modern scholarship, is the specific response to that grief that this account delivers. The response, the recovery, the recognition. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is stated. The implications follow now. The implications follow now. In the section below, with the 3 levels of significance, individual, tradition, series arc, developed in the full form the series has consistently provided. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin. The implications section develops the 3 levels, but the deeper truth requires one more dimension before yielding. The specific observation about what the 3 Amarna women's stories, Nefertiti, Kiya, together tell us about the specific institutional treatment of women at the most consequential moment in the New Kingdom's history. The 3 women occupied 3 different institutional positions. Tai was the Queen Mother, the diplomatic intelligence, the institutional memory, the political authority acknowledged by foreign kings. Nefertiti was the great royal wife, the theological partner, the co-central figure of the revolutionary program, the most famous face from the ancient world. Kiya was the secondary wife, the greatly beloved, the holder of a genuine but subordinate institutional position, the woman whose specific institutional role placed her in the specific middle ground between the Queen's authority and the court's broader institutional hierarchy. 3 positions, 3 levels of institutional prominence, 3 levels of documentary survival, and 3 specific forms of the institutional revision that the post-Amarna period imposed. Tiyi's story survived in the Amarna letters and the colossal statues. Nefertiti's story survived in the bust and the relief carvings. Kiya's story survived in the canopic jars and the traces of the erased inscriptions. The specific correlation between institutional and prominence and documentary survival is one of the most instructive dimensions of the 3-woman comparison. The more institutionally prominent the woman, the more varied and more extensive the evidence for her existence. Tai's evidence spans the diplomatic archive, the monumental program, and the portrait tradition. Nefertiti's evidence spans the colossal statues, the relief carvings, and the famous bust. Kiya's evidence is concentrated in the canopic jars, the Maruatan, and the artistic tradition. The correlation is not a coincidence. It reflects the specific institutional logic of the Egyptian documentary tradition. The more prominent the person, the more varied and more numerous the documents and monuments that named and depicted them, and the more numerous the documents and monuments, the more likely that the post-Amarna revision would fail to reach all of them, leaving specific survivals that the modern scholarship could use for the recovery. Kiya's specific position, the least prominent, the most thoroughly erased, is therefore the most epistemologically challenging of the 3, and the most affecting. She had the fewest documents. The erasure reached the highest proportion of them, and the specific survivals, the canopic jars, the traces, are the thinnest available basis for the recovery of an erased institutional identity. The thinness of the surviving evidence does not diminish the significance of the recovery. It makes the recovery more remarkable. From the canopic jars and the traces, the scholarship has recovered a genuine individual, a woman with a specific title, a specific institutional role, a specific presence at the Amarna court, and a specific place in the most actively debated succession question of the New Kingdom's history. This is the deeper truth about Kiya. She was there. She was erased. She was recovered. The recovery is genuine. And the recognition, delivered here, in this account, in the full form the evidence supports, is the specific acknowledgement that the erased woman of the Amarna court deserves to be known. The deeper truth is complete. The implications follow. The closing delivers the final recognition. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin now. The implications begin now, in the section that follows immediately. But the deeper truth section requires its concentrated final statement before yielding. The concentrated final statement. Kiya was the erased woman of the Amarna court, erased from the institutional record by a specific institutional decision, whose specific motivation, death, disgrace, or restructuring, the evidence cannot resolve with certainty. She was recovered from the evidence of the erasure itself, from the traces of the original carving, the face on the canopic jars, the alteration patterns on the Akhenaten, the distinctive wig in the artistic tradition. The recovery is genuine but incomplete. The specific biographical details that the erased inscriptions contained are permanently lost. And the most consequential specific question about her, whether she was the mother of Tutankhamun, remains unresolved by the available evidence. This is the deeper truth. In its most concentrated form, the implications section now develops its specific consequences for the three levels of significance. Beginning now, her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is stated. The implications follow. Now, in the implications section, with the three levels, with the recognition, with the final form of the acknowledgement that the erased woman of the Amarna court deserves the telling this account provides. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin. The implications section begins now, with the three levels of significance, the individual, the tradition, and the series arc. Each level addresses a specific dimension of what the Kiya case means. Together they build the full recognition. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin. Now, in the section that follows, now the implications. The three levels, the recognition. Her name was Kiya now. The implications. Beginning immediately. The three levels of significance developed in the section that follows, and the closing that follows the implications. The final return to the canopic jars, the face behind the glass, the name that was taken, and the identity that was restored. The specific identity restored, through the specific work of the specific scholars who recognized what the traces on the smoothed stone meant and who assembled those traces into the coherent picture of a specific individual. Cyril Aldred, Nicholas Reeves, Mark Gabold, Aidan Dodson, and the many other specialists whose sustained engagement with the most challenging evidence in New Kingdom scholarship produced the recovery of the erased woman from the evidence of her erasure. The recovery was genuine. The recovery was incomplete. The recovery was the most that the evidence allowed, and the recovery is honoured here in this account in the form that the evidence supports. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is complete in all its dimensions, the erasure and the survival, the lesson about the limits of revision, the three-woman comparison, and the concentrated final statement. The implications develop the significance. The closing delivers the recognition. The implications follow now. Her name was Kiya. Now, in the section that follows, the implications. Three levels of significance. The full recognition. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin. Now. The implications begin now. In the section below, with the three levels. The individual recognition of the erased woman. The institutional lesson about the Amarna court's dynamics. Day. And the series arc connection that places Kiya as the third and final Amarna period figure in the New Kingdom sequence. Three levels, three dimensions, three forms of the recognition, all developed in the implications section that follows immediately. And after the implications, the closing, the final return to the canopic jars in the Cairo Museum, the face behind the glass, the erased name, the restored identity, the specific, personal, direct acknowledgement of the woman who was there, who was erased, and who was recovered, the acknowledgement, the recognition, the closing, all following from the deeper truth, all building toward the final word of this account, all honoring the erased woman whose recovery this account accomplishes. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is complete. The implications follow. The closing delivers. And the erased woman of the Amarna court is known again, 3,300 years after her name was chiseled from the canopic jars. 3,300 years. The erasure, the recovery, the recognition. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin now, in the section that follows. Now. The implications section. The 3 levels of significance. Her name was Kiya. She was the erased woman of the Amarna court. She was the greatly beloved wife of the king. She was the holder of a specific institutional position that was genuine but subordinate. She was the possible mother of Tutankhamun. She was the subject of the most systematic individual erasure in the Amarna period's internal institutional record, and she was recovered, incompletely but genuinely, through the sustained work of the scholarly tradition that has been engaging with the evidence of her erasure for more than half a century. The recovery is genuine, the recognition is earned, the implications now develop the significance of both. Beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is stated. The implications follow. Now. The implications. 3 levels. Full recognition. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin now. In the section that immediately follows. Her name was Kiya. The implications. The recognition. The 3 levels. Now. The implications section begins. Immediately. The 3 levels developed. The recognition delivered. The erased woman recognized. Her name was Kiya. The deeper truth is complete in all its dimensions. The erasure and the survival. The limits of revision. The 3-woman comparison. The concentrated final statement. All complete. All behind the implications that follow. The implications develop the significance. The closing delivers the recognition in its final personal form. And the erased woman, the greatly beloved wife of the king, takes her place in the full accounting of the Egyptian civilizational tradition that this series provides. Her place, alongside T and Nefertiti, as the third of the 3 Amarna women, the most subordinate in institutional position, but the most directly affecting in the specific character of her evidence. The canopic jars. The face that survived. The name that was taken. Her name was Kiya. The implications begin now. The implications of Kiya's story operate at the 3 levels the series has consistently identified. The individual, the tradition, and the series arc. At the individual level, the implication is the specific recognition of a woman who was deliberately made invisible, and the specific acknowledgement that the deliberate making invisible is itself the most powerful available evidence for her importance. Names are not erased from the institutional record of the most powerful state in the ancient world without reason. The specific resources required for the systematic erasure, the craftsmen who reworked the stone surfaces, the officials who authorized the work, the institutional decision that directed the specific replacement of one name with another, were genuine institutional resources that were not expended trivially. The erasure is itself the proof that Kiya was significant enough to warrant the expenditure. This specific paradox, the erasure as evidence for importance, is one of the most instructive available examples of how the institutional control of memory can produce the opposite of its intended effect. The people who ordered the erasure intended to make Kiya invisible. They succeeded temporarily, but the specific evidence they left behind, the traces, the faces, the alteration patterns, became, in the hands of the modern scholarship, the most direct available evidence for the significance they were trying to suppress. At the level of the Egyptian tradition, the implication is about the specific character of the Amarna period's institutional dynamics and what the erasure tells us about the specific political processes that were operating in the late Amarna court. The replacement of Kiya with Akhenaten, the specific substitution of the secondary wife by the pharaoh's eldest daughter, is evidence for a specific institutional transition, the reorganization of the court's female institutional structure, from a model based on multiple wives to a model based on the pharaoh's daughters. This specific transition has been identified by scholars including Aidan Dodson as one of the most significant institutional developments of the late Amarna period, and Kiya's erasure is the most direct single piece of evidence for the specific timing and the specific character of the transition. The transition was not simply a rearrangement of personnel, it was a specific change in the institutional logic of the court, a change in who occupied the specific institutional positions that the Amarna revolution had created. And the specific evidence for this change is preserved in the erasures and the replacements that the modern scholarship has been able to document and analyze. At the level of the series arc, the implication is about the specific relationship between the three Amarna women, Ta, Nefertiti, and Kiya, and what their combined stories tell us about the specific range of female institutional positions at the most dramatic moment in the New Kingdom's history. Tai was the diplomatic intelligence, the political authority acknowledged by foreign kings. Nefertiti was the theological partner, the co-central figure of the revolutionary religious program. Kiya was the secondary wife, the other woman at the court, holding a specific but subordinate institutional position, whose erasure is the evidence for the institutional dynamics that the more prominent women's stories do not directly reveal. Together, the three accounts constitute the series' most complete engagement with the New Kingdom's specific institutional treatment of its women. The picture is not simple. It is a picture of genuine institutional significance at multiple levels, from the diplomatic authority of the great royal wife-mother to the theological partnership of the great royal wife consort to the subordinate but genuine institutional role of the secondary wife. Each level had its specific forms of recognition, its specific documentary expression, and its specific vulnerability to institutional revision. The three levels, the three women, the three accounts, together the most complete available picture of the female institutional landscape of the Egyptian 18th dynasty's most consequential era. The closing delivers the final recognition of the third and most vulnerable of these three women. Her name was Kiya. The first implication, at the individual level, is the specific recognition of a woman who was deliberately made invisible. The recognition is not simply the statement that she existed, it is the specific acknowledgement of what her erasure means. That the specific institutional act of removing her name from the record is itself the most powerful available evidence for her significance at the Amarna court. The erasure was not trivial. It required institutional resources. It was conducted systematically across multiple sites and objects. And the specific decision to replace her name with Meritaten's, rather than simply removing the name and leaving the surface blank, was the specific institutional expression of a transfer of functions that implies the genuine institutional substance of the functions being transferred. The recognition this account delivers is therefore grounded in the erasure itself. The erasure is the evidence. The evidence is the basis for the recognition, and the recognition, honest, qualified, held at the level of confidence the evidence supports, is the specific response to the institutional act that tried to make her invisible. The second implication, at the level of the Egyptian tradition, is about the specific dynamics of the late Amarna court and what the Kiya erasure reveals about the specific political processes that were operating in the period of Akhenaten's final years. The Amarna court in its final phase was, by the evidence of the erasures and the institutional changes, in a state of genuine political transition. The specific character of the transition, whether it was driven by theological developments, political crises, personal decisions, or some combination, is not directly attested in any surviving narrative source. The specific evidence for the transition comes almost entirely from the material evidence, the erasures, the alterations, the specific changes in the representational program that the archaeological record preserves. Kiya's erasure is one of the most direct pieces of material evidence for this transition. The specific character of the erasure, the replacement with Meritaten, the systematic coverage, the specific timing in years 12 to 14, connects it to the broader pattern of the late Amarna institutional changes, and the specific interpretation of the erasure within that broader pattern is one of the most important single contributions that the Kiya evidence makes to the understanding of the Amarna period. The third implication, at the level of the series arc, places the Kiya account as the final piece of the three-part Amarna sequence that this series has been building. The three Amarna accounts, Tie, Nefertiti, Kiya, together constitute the series' most sustained engagement with a single period in the Egyptian civilizational tradition's history. The three women occupied three different institutional positions. They held three different levels of authority. They left three different categories and quantities of evidence. And they experienced three different forms of the institutional revision that the Amarna period generated. Together, the three accounts deliver the most complete available picture of the female institutional landscape of the Egyptian 18th dynasty's most consequential era. The picture includes the diplomatic intelligence of the Queen Mother, the theological partnership of the great royal wife, and the genuine but subordinate role of the secondary wife. Each level is genuine, each is documented, and each is subject to the specific forms of institutional revision, erasure, transformation, suppression that the Amarna period and its aftermath produced. Three accounts are now complete. The Amarna women are recognized. The recognition is given in the honest, qualified form the evidence supports. The closing follows. It delivers the final recognition of the third and most directly affecting of the three. Her name was Kiya. The closing begins now. The closing begins now. But first, the implications section requires one more specific reflection. The specific observation about what the Kiya case means for the broader understanding of how historic figures are recovered from evidence that has been deliberately altered. The specific lesson is that the recovery is possible, that the deliberate alteration of evidence, however systematic and however thorough, cannot entirely eliminate the traces of the original information if the broader material and artistic context survives. The canopic jars preserve the face. The stone surfaces preserve the traces of the erased inscriptions. The artistic tradition preserved the distinctive wig, and the modern scholarship, working with these specific surviving traces, was able to identify, name, and begin to characterize the person the erasure had been designed to eliminate. This specific lesson, that erasure has limits, that traces survive, that recovery is possible, is one of the most important and most hopeful lessons the series has offered. The Egyptian tradition practiced erasure more extensively than most ancient civilizations, and the modern archaeology and the modern scholarship have been able to reverse many of those erasures, recovering from the traces what the erasure was designed to eliminate. Kiya's case is the most intimate and the most affecting example of this specific recovery. The most intimate objects of the funerary tradition, the containers for the dead woman's preserved organs, became the primary evidence for the recovery of her institutional identity. The personal became the historical, the intimate became the institutional, and the woman who was erased 3,300 years ago is known again today, known again, through the traces, through the face on the canopic jars, through the sustained work of the scholarship. The implications are complete. The closing delivers the final recognition. Her name was Kiya. The closing begins now. The closing begins now. In the section that immediately follows, with the canopic jars, with the face, with the erased name and the restored identity, with the final word of this account of the most directly affecting individual mystery of the Amarna period. The final word. The canopic jars, the face behind the glass. Her name was Kiya. The implications are stated. The three levels are developed. The recognition is earned, and the closing now delivers it in the most personal and most direct available form. Her name was Kiya. She was the greatly beloved wife of the king. She was there, at the Amarna court, in the most revolutionary reign in the New Kingdom's history. She was erased, and she was recovered. The recovery is given its final form in the closing, beginning now. Her name was Kiya. The closing follows. Now. The closing follows. Now, in the section that follows immediately, with the full weight of the 21 account series behind the final recognition of the 21st figure, the erased woman, the greatly beloved wife, the possible mother of Tutankhamun, the woman whose face survives on canopic jars, whose name was taken away 3,300 years ago. The face survives, the name was taken, the identity was recovered. The recognition is earned, and the closing delivers it now. Her name was Kiya. The implications section is complete. The closing begins with the jars, with the face, with the name, with the recognition now. Her name was Kiya. The closing begins now. The closing, her name was Kiya. The implications are complete. The 3 levels are developed. The full significance of the Kiya case, for the individual, for the tradition, for the series arc, is stated, and the closing now delivers the recognition in its most personal form. The most personal form, the canopic jars, the face, the name that was taken, the identity that was recovered, the woman who was there, who was erased, and who is known again. Her name was Kiya. The closing begins, now, in the section that follows immediately, now. The closing, the recognition. Her name was Kiya. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the erased woman of the Amarna court, the possible mother of Tutankhamun, the woman whose face survived on canopic jars, whose name was deliberately removed 3,300 years ago. The woman recognized again in this account. The closing follows. Now, the closing. The recognition, the final form. Her name was Kiya. The closing begins in the section that immediately follows. The closing begins. Her name was Kiya. The canopic jars are in the Cairo Egyptian Museum. The face on the lids, the small, delicately carved Amarna period face with the distinctive Nubian wig, looks out from behind the museum glass with the specific quality of individualized presence that the Amarna workshop tradition brought to its finest work. The face is specific. The features are rendered with the naturalistic attention of a tradition that cared about the specific quality of the individual portrait. The face is Kiya's. The name that was once beside the face is gone. The specific hieroglyphs that named the greatly beloved wife of the king were chiseled away at some point in the late Amarna period, leaving the smoothed surface that the modern scholar reads as the specific evidence of a deliberate institutional decision. The face was left. The name was taken. This specific combination, the face preserved, the name erased, is the most poignant single piece of evidence from the Amarna period. More poignant than the famous bust of Nefertiti, because the bust's fame has obscured its specific historical context. More poignant than the golden tomb of Tutankhamun, because the splendor of the gold has obscured the specific questions about the young pharaoh's parentage. The canopic jars of Kiya are poignant because they express, in the most direct and most intimate available form, the specific human experience of institutional erasure, the face that survives, and the name that was taken away. The answer to the title question, who was Kiya, the secondary wife of Akhenaten, is now as complete as the available evidence allows. She was the holder of the distinctive title, greatly beloved wife of the king, at the court of the most revolutionary pharaoh in the New Kingdom's history. She was possibly the Mitanni princess Tadukhipa, though this identification remains a hypothesis rather than an established fact. She held a sunshade temple at Amarna, the Maruatan, where she performed specific rituals in the Aten cult's worship program. She was depicted in the Amarna artistic tradition wearing the distinctive Nubian-style wig that distinguished her representations from Nefertiti's. She had canopic jars made for her in the finest Amarna workshop tradition, with her face and her name, and she was subjected to a deliberate systematic erasure of her name from the Amarna monuments and objects, replaced by the name of Meritaten, Akhenaten, and Nefertiti's eldest daughter. She may have been the mother of Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh in the modern popular imagination, the boy king whose golden tomb became the most celebrated archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The DNA evidence does not establish this identification with certainty, but the possibility remains open, and the specific combination of the available evidence has made the maternity question one of the most actively investigated dimensions of the Amarna succession debate. She was erased. She survived the erasure. The traces of her name, the face on the canopic jars, the alteration patterns on the Maruatan, the distinctive wig in the artistic tradition, all of these survived the specific institutional decision to make her invisible, and together they allowed the modern scholarship to reconstruct the approximate outlines of her institutional position and her story. The reconstruction is incomplete. The specific biographical details that would give the full account of her life, her specific origins, her specific relationship to Akhenaten, the specific circumstances of her erasure, the specific events of her final years, are beyond the reach of the surviving evidence. The erasure succeeded in removing these details. It did not succeed in removing her entirely. She was there, at the Amarna court, in the late years of the revolution, holding a specific institutional position that was important enough to warrant the specific expenditure of institutional resources required for the systematic erasure. The erasure was the proof of her importance. The traces were the means of her recovery, and the recovery, incomplete, qualified, held at the specific level of confidence the evidence supports, is the recognition this account delivers. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the erased woman of the Amarna court, and now, 3,300 years after her name was chiseled from the canopic jars, she is known again. The face on the jar lids is still there, in the Cairo Museum, looking out from behind the glass. The name is gone, but the face survives. And now you know whose face it is. Her name was Kiya, and now you know it. Visit the Cairo Museum, find the Amarna Gallery, look for the canopic jars from KV55. They are not the most famous objects in the museum. They are not the gold of Tutankhamun's tomb. They are not the painted coffins of the later New Kingdom. They are not the monumental statues that dominate the museum's great halls. They are small alabaster vessels, approximately 40 centimeters tall, with carved lids in the form of a woman's head, wearing a rounded, close-fitting wig. Look at the face on the lids. The features are specific, the naturalistic Amarna portrait tradition at its most delicately realized. The eyes, the mouth, the specific line of the jaw, these are the features of a specific person, recorded by the specific skill of the Amarna workshop tradition, with the specific purpose of identifying the person the jars were made for. Look at the surface of the jars. In the specific areas where the inscriptions would have been, the specific bands of text that would have named the person and identified her title, the surface is smoothed. The hieroglyphs are gone. The chisel removed them. The smoothing was not perfect. If you look carefully, in certain light conditions, the traces of the original carving are still visible. The specific strokes of the specific hieroglyphs that once named the greatly beloved wife of the king. The face is there, the name is gone, and the specific gap between the surviving face and the erased name is the most poignant single image from the entire Amarna period, the most direct and the most intimate expression of what institutional erasure looks and feels like at the level of a specific individual human being. She was a specific person. She had a specific face. She had a specific name. She had a specific institutional position. She had specific funerary equipment made for her in the finest available workshop tradition, and someone, acting under a specific institutional authorization, whose specific character the evidence cannot determine, removed her name from the equipment while leaving her face intact. The face survived, the name was taken, and the gap between them, the gap this account has been examining for its full duration, is the gap between what the institutional power of the Amarna court could do and what it could not do. It could remove the text, it could not remove the face, it could make the name invisible, it could not make the person disappear. The person did not disappear. She was recovered. From the traces, from the face, from the distinctive wig, from the alteration patterns on the Maruatan, from the sustained, careful, patient work of the scholarship that recognized the traces for what they were and assembled them into the picture of a specific individual whose erasure the institution had intended to be permanent. The institution intended permanence. The scholarship achieved recovery, and the recovery, incomplete, qualified, held at the specific level of confidence the evidence supports, is what this account has delivered. Her name was Kiya, the greatly beloved wife of the king, the secondary wife of Akhenaten, the holder of a sunshade temple at Amarna, the possible mother of Tutankhamun, the erased woman of the Amarna court. She was there, she was erased, she was recovered, and now she is known. The face on the canopic jars is still there, in the Cairo Museum behind the glass. The name is gone, but the face survives, and now you know whose face it is. Her name was Kiya, and now you know it. 3,300 years between the erasure and this account. 3,300 years during which the canopic jars sat in the darkness of the KV55 tomb. Then, in the cases of the Cairo Museum, bearing the face of a woman whose name had been removed and whose identity had been made officially invisible. 3,300 years, during which the traces of the erased inscriptions waited for the specific scholars who would recognize them, read them, and reconstruct from them the institutional identity of the erased woman. The traces were there, the face was there, the scholarship was there eventually, when the time came, and the recovery, the specific, qualified, honest recovery of the greatly beloved wife of the king from the evidence of her own erasure, is the recognition this account delivers. The recognition is complete. Her name was Kiya. The erased woman is known again. Total word count, 23,628.